That was an interesting clap.
Yes.
It's like, phew. All right. Anyway, what is it, 3?
Yeah, what? Yeah, I think so.
Welcome to Contra Gentile Season 3, Episode 3.
Yes.
Today we have Ace with us of at
Thanks so
Ace,
much for inviting.
at Ace_Archist.
Oh, okay.
That's a thing, right? I've noticed a lot of people have the
Archist in the end?
Archist
okay.
in the end.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a sphere theme. I'm late, so I don't know when all this happened. But anyway, do you want to do wine real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want a Malbec or a Zinfandel?
Malbec.
Go. Oh, it's just Costco 2020, whatever. I was so burned on the $45 wine not feeling like a $45 bottle of wine that I bought a $6 one.
It's probably going to taste even better.
So,
Kirkland shit is pretty good, so.
It is.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers. Ace, you don't drink, right?
No, I'm not a huge drinker. I drink on special occasions, but unfortunately, I don't have anything.
This
right
isn't
now.
special.
I should have. It is special. No. I forgot to get.
No, you're good. So, Ace, tell me about yourself and what you do online. What's your thing?
Okay, so I am a terminally online anarchist. I argue against people all day on Twitter for anarchism, and that's pretty much like kind of my whole shtick. That's my wheelhouse on Twitter.
Jeremy's never online.
Yeah.
Ever, so he's never going to see it. And he doesn't follow a bunch of people, but like it's really spectacular when you see Ace quote tweet someone and then 3 hours later is still quote tweeting the same person, and they're both like filling the text of every tweet in long form arguments.
Nice.
That's how you would do it.
Yeah.
When you argue with people online, you do like 6 tweet threads.
Oh, yeah. It gets ridiculous. I mean, you kind of have to if you're going to make a coherent argument.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Ace would agree. You guys are actually kind of. What was I saying? I think I'm about to talk to the 2 most autistic people alive for different reasons. Because how many times have I been on Slurp Gang, Ace? Is it 4?
Oh, about 4 now.
Well,
4 or
3
5.
officially,
Yeah.
4 in total.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's right. We have 1
5
unreleased episode. Yeah.
It was too good. The world isn't ready. But
It was.
Slurking is the one with narratives, right?
Narratives? That's Ghost Jill.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah. No, I would not say that Slurping has any narrative whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah, it's.
What's Slurping?
What's their thing?
Yeah, what's their thing?
Yeah, Ace. What is Slurp Gang?
Schizophrenia.
Oh,
schizophrenia.
In true fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So is it like conversation?
It's
topical.
It's conversational, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. It's topical sometimes, but mostly just just riffing back and forth. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's very fun.
Yeah.
It's like you show up to a party and you don't really have anything to say yet. But once you drink a little bit and you start to catch the waves, you just jump on.
Yeah.
You just ride it out till it's over.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's fun. So Jeremy's frazzled.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was working all day. Really?
We literally got here like 20 minutes ago.
Yes,
and set up all the cameras and stuff.
Yeah. I just came back from a shoot, and then the rest of the day I was developing film, editing photos and stuff. So it was just a lot of work.
But now we're here.
So I'm completely unprepared.
Yeah,
but it's fine.
It'll be good.
I'm always unprepared in every podcast I do, so it's
okay.
We've been trying to be prepared.
Yeah.
It's worked out well, but it's nice to do something off the cuff sometimes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like this. I think it'll get pretty dense.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm interested. I'm literally just interested to hear you. Anytime I invite somebody on, I literally am like, how are they going to interact with Jeremy?
Oh yeah,
that's the shtick. Everyone's like, the Jeremy treatment.
Yeah,
you've been nice to everybody, but Thaddeus.
Yes.
But
I think I was nice.
You were compassionate in the classical sense.
Yes, yeah. I never throw insults at anybody.
No.
I just if if a point needs to be repeated because the person is not understanding basic reason, and then I'm going to keep repeating
Right.
it. But people take that as rude. I don't know why. I mean, honestly, that's not being rude. If you're trying to teach a child math and say 2 plus 2 equals 4, and they don't get it, you repeat yourself. Well, I'm going to reword it a different way. Maybe you'll understand it when you have the quantity of that which is greater than 1 and less than 3. And you add that together with another one. It's a quantity that is greater than 3 and less than 4. And so there's a variety of different ways that you could word it, but people think you're being a dick. It's like, I'm not.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway. So I was curious. I know that we did an episode on Rothbard.
Mm-hmm.
That
was a great episode.
Thank you. Provoked
conversation.
Anything like a whole range of responses from the anarchist can I say anarchist / libertarian thing? Or is that okay? Is that close enough?
Yeah, that's fine. Oh yeah, absolutely.
If I don't know if that's like saying like Taiwanese / Chinese people.
No.
Well, yeah, because I think anarchy is the logical end of
libertarianism.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Ace, I told Derek that that libertarianism was half-baked anarchism.
Yes. Yeah.
And he agreed. I think that's right. But anyway, that episode provoked a lot of good response, but also a lot of like either confusion or like strong disagreement with especially how you characterized coercion in trade.
Yes, yeah.
And I didn't know if Ace had any thoughts. I know that you and I spoke about it a little bit a long time ago, so I don't really. I just remember that. I don't know because you guys are both. You're not well, I don't even know if you're not ideologically aligned in a lot of ways, but you're not an anarchist and you're an anarchist, and I don't know.
Yeah, we're probably are against similar things, but we're not for similar things.
Okay.
And that normally is what happens when you see cohesion and agreement. It's like we agree with what ought not to be the case.
Yeah.
But we maybe we disagree on what ought to be the case.
Yeah.
Right. And so yeah, I don't I don't know if I could rehash and try to remember what I was saying. I was just simply saying that I think many things that I read on Rothbard, because people suggested for me to read his other works, and so I started to skim through it and read it quite a bit. But I still found the same intrinsic problems. I think he expounds on his ideas much greater in his other works, but it's the fundamentals is kind of what I was disagreeing with. Just the idea that there is no coercion when it comes to, I guess, private companies, or what he called was the social. I can't remember.
What was it? There's the
social power.
The social power.
Social power and the government power.
Yeah,
state power.
State power.
State power
yeah.
and social power.
And I guess I just didn't fully see how he can believe that the social power was not itself coercive, and I just think there exist two coercive powers, and because they could ruin your life in different ways. I mean, sure, the government can put you in jail. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, but the social powers can not hire you, or they can refuse service to you. Basic things that you would want. Like right now, if a lot of people are getting upset that many of the social powers that exist, like with Silicon Valley, basically, all the social networking could just ban you for having wrong.
But I think that an argument against that, and I'd like Ace to say some stuff too, but is that I don't know how you can differentiate between Silicon Valley as a social power separate from the state power.
Well, that's what my point is. I think they're unelected officials, so we can't say they're identical, but ultimately you have two coercive powers. One power that gives you goods and services that you could reject if you want, obviously. If you don't want to partake in it, you can. But you could say the same thing about a government. I could be a hermit. I don't have to actually live in society. I don't have to pay taxes. I could just live in the woods if I wanted to. I could be a hobo. And so, I mean, there are options for me. They're not good options. They're not options that we really want to do. But it's the same thing with the social powers, is that you can live without them. But in reality, if the cell phone company does not want to give you cell phone or internet or whatever, it'll be very hard for you to function in society properly. You need a phone number, you need an email address, you need all these things really to function in society in an ordinary way rather than an extraordinary way. But But I think in both cases, you just have coercive powers that basically say, because the nature of trade is I have something that you want, right? And I want something that you have. And so you give me what I want and I give you what you want. And the government functions the same way. What do you want? You don't want to be homeless. You don't want to be in jail. You don't want these things. Okay. So if you give me what I want, I'm going to give you what you want, where you can live in society not as an outlaw.
Yeah.
And so I think in both cases, it's simply a trade that we kind of agree on, that we're just functioning in the world this way. And so that's really what the only the disagreement, the intrinsic disagreement that I have with Rothbard is it's not so much that I think that the state is good, but I also think in the same way the social power is not good either. I think they're just two coercive powers that try to gain power over you and over your nature and over your goods and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Ace, do you have anything to say?
Yeah. I actually agree. I actually agree with you that I think Rothbard doesn't articulate social power in a way that I think it deserves in some sense, or in the way that other anarchists have kind of articulated it. I think the way, so I do agree that social power can absolutely be coercive. Because I think sometimes people read Anatomy of the State, and I think this is also a fault on Rothbard's part, how he presents it, is that the social powers can absolutely be coercive. But I think what distinguishes them is that the state, by the definition of what the state is by inherently coercive, whereas the social power, in some senses, can exist in a non-coercive manner. So it's that
right,
distinction.
And I agree with that, but I guess what I'm saying is that the nature of trade of any sort is coercive. I think the only way it wouldn't be coercive if you're just a generous person and you're giving shit. If you're just somebody, I'm just going to give this to you. I don't need anything back. I'm not asking you to give me money back. I want you to have this. And obviously that's the only way that I think something is not coercive, because you're not holding something against the person. You're not dangling something in front of them that they desire, that you're kind of exploiting to get their money. You're simply saying, here you go. And I don't think that's how the social power
is. That
works.
Trade, though?
It wouldn't be. That's what I'm saying. I think what I'm saying is that the intrinsic nature of trade is just as coercive as the intrinsic nature of taxation. Because in both cases, there's a good that you want. One of them is living in a society, not as an outlaw. And the other one are whatever satiates your appetites at that moment, whether it is a house or whether it's internet, whether it's food, whatever. And that they're going to hold it, and they're not going to give it to you unless you give them what they want.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of holding it hostage. I'm not going to give this to you. You're not going to have it until you give me what you want. And what I'm saying is that the nature of both is coercive, not so much that one can and one can't be. I don't think any state power can exist not coercively, and I think no social power can exist not coercively. I think they both exist coercively because they're both part of the same reality of state. Yeah.
I would probably say, like, this is I completely see what you're getting at, but I think the only disagreement I would have is, and this isn't also articulated well in Anatomy of the State either, where from the anarchist perspective, when the anarchists are talking about coercion, they're specifically talking about it in relation to a person's rights, right? So the anarchist position would be that each person has the highest claim to their life in relation to other human beings, right? So I have the highest claim to my life in relation to you two. You two have the highest claim to your life in relation to Grant and I. So
right, yeah.
So because of that, when we engage in a trade, and we also have to like distinguish between like a person who incorporates resources into their ongoing projects, and that's what we would call property, because that person has a right to that property. They have a right to the property, and the other person doesn't. Them holding the property would not be seen as like a rights violation not by not giving it to them. So when the state, but what's different with the state is the state threatens your rights. So the trade that the state is engaged in is saying, we'll not violate your rights, but we won't send you to jail, but you have to give us your money. So it puts the onus on the person who is trying to defend their rights to give up something of theirs. So it's more of an extortion in the state's part, right? So they're giving up something that does not justly belong to the state. Whereas with the trade, assumedly, both people own the property that they're trading, and then because they both own it, they each have a right to hold on to it and not give it to the other person.
And I do know that I don't know is the concept of self-ownership essentially, or is it just essential to all schools of anarchism?
It's more so. There's two broad schools of anarchism, and they all have subcategories. So there's the social anarchists that you see in like Germany, Russia, France, and then kind of like you have the individualist anarchists that also in America and France in different time periods. And the market anarchists generally support more of a reliance on self-ownership, and the social anarchists are more about like what you owe to the community, right?
So is it like left anarchism and right
almost
anarchism?
sounds like it,
Social anarchists
yeah.
are left. Yes, social anarchists are left anarchists, and market anarchists tend to be right anarchists, generally speaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot about like, what is it? Is NAP non-aggression?
Non-aggression principle.
Principle?
Yeah, it's a shorthand. Yeah.
So yeah, like some of the questions that normally arise on my end there is really, I guess, the notion of rights. And this is probably where we would disagree quite heavily, because just to put it bluntly before I ask my questions, I do not see any proper support for a notion of rights. I think rights in itself is just a fictitious reality that we kind of constructed. Either that's because rights is something that is deemed by some kind of authority.
Are you you're talking about rights that precede the state.
When somebody says like unalienable rights, I'll be like, yes, but
that's what I mean. But
yes,
that implies that they precede the state.
Yes,
you're not saying that the state doesn't bestow you with
right.
this
I'm not
right.
saying that. Right.
You're saying
that there has to be some kind of bestower, and normally it's from like a Newtonian or Protestant worldview of reality, where you have a Newtonian God who bestows rights onto people, and I think that's why it's so important in the Declaration of Independence in American, basically the American ideology, that the Newtonian God exists in order for one to deem that rights as being bestowed by a higher king or higher authority from the government. But when you eliminate that, when you eliminate the Newtonian God, and then I think you also eliminate the rights, because where then do the rights come from? Rather there would just be desires, right? There would just be innate desires that we have. We innately desire to live, right? We innately desire to have property. We innately desire to be happy, and so on and so forth. But it wouldn't be a right that was bestowed by some kind of authority, and I think that's and so normally what I would ask is that if you are an anarchist, are you also like a more theistic personalist? Are you one who believes in an en summum notion of God, the way that Newton and the Protestants do, that deems these rights, or are you saying that the rights exist?
En summum, maybe.
And so, okay, so
or should I?
Yeah. If you want to. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. You know what that is? Could you just want to answer it?
Yeah.
Okay, just answer.
So
the listeners, they listen to old episodes.
Yeah.
We've done it.
Yeah. So I personally speaking would not describe myself that way. I do think you hit on something important, because when you were talking about innate desire, they seem to be just innate desires. So I'm what would be described as a phenomenological conservative on these types of matters, where it's like I don't think just because we feel an innate desire for something that it necessarily means it's just subjective, right? So I think you very well could make the case that considering that most people tend to have this intuition that their people have rights in some sense, or at least they construct rights from these intuitions, or articulate them from these intuitions. I think that kind of lends credence to the fact that that's where where they come from in a deeper level. I don't know. I can't really make that claim metaphysically, but I do think the fact that most people have an intuition that it's wrong to murder. Then most people have an intuition that it's wrong to steal. There's some edge cases like psychopaths, sociopaths, but in general, most people tend to have those intuitions. And I think that's kind of like where the starting point for most anarchists are.
Okay, so how do you justify the intuitions, though?
Right. So
Yeah.
I think Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways you could justify it, right? One way is through the concept of like natural law. If your end, like as a human being, if your end as a human being is like to live as a human being and to use reason, you live your life through the use of reason, then it would seem like if your if you're using violence against another person, you're essentially living to a lesser end, as you would compared to if you were to live a life where you interacted with people through reason and cooperation, as opposed to violence on them or initiating.
But what if you used your reason with violence, like the assertion of one's power, right? And so, like,
sure.
you know, I think this is why so many people are intrigued by sociopaths, is because most sociopaths are rather intelligent, and so they're using their faculties of reason that I would say in the natural law theory would say it is what it means to be human, a rational animal.
Yeah.
And then you're using it also to assert power, and that is part of our nature as well, right? We assert power and dominion over things. Obviously, we hunt, we eat, we kill, we grow crops and everything. And so it is also in the same way that you're using your reason for the power and authority and subjugation of other people. And I think many, you see, I think part of the issue with intuition is that you can't really divorce intuition from past cognitive realities in which we were indoctrinated in. And so there were some researches done by a psychologist named Cohen, who wanted to understand the base like what are the intuitions that human beings have before socialization, right? Mm-hmm. And so he took a child 24 hours after birth, only because it was illegal for him to take the child prior to that. He wanted to pull the baby out, so they had to wait a whole 24 hours. And then when removing the child from 24 hours, he separated the females and the males, and he wanted to see what kind of the base intuitions of human beings are, right? And so you know, some of them were in the sense of what you were saying in terms of reason. So, that was normally towards the male babies, and so the male babies looked at shapes, colors, and they wanted to interact with it. The other one was the feminine virtues, and with the females normally incorporated, they looked at faces, they looked at other things, and then when they kept testing them throughout the months that they were testing them, you know, the female babies then began to nurture stuffed animals, dolls, and everything, while the boys tend to be more destructive. You know, they'll take plates, they'll throw it down, take cars, play, whatever. It's because it's the way that they begin to take apart the world and understand what's going on, right? They're trying to use their bodies and the faculties of reason in order for to discover what's around them. And so you can, I think, in some way through some research determine what our innate I guess desires that we would have, but if we actually look at the history of man, the fundamental principles that we hold today was really not found in the majority of Western and Eastern civilization. In reality, it was that, and you know, like what is that famous book when the kids kill each other and shit?
Pigs.
Oh God, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Why can't I remember?
Why can't I remember it either?
They're on an
That's
island,
like my mom's
right?
favorite book.
We all know what it is.
It's William
We all know what it is,
Golding
but I
is
can't
the
remember.
author.
Yeah. But anyways, and so you're on an island and everything, and so when you throw kids without law, what normally happens is that the natural
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies, yes.
Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
There's a pig involved.
Yes,
I was
yeah.
like, it's not a pig.
You tend to develop a hierarchy, right? Mm-hmm. And the hierarchy is what then begins to dictate the way that we behave, because in
Do
reality,
you like that book?
Yeah, I had to read it for
Do you like it though?
Yeah, I like the story.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
Jeremy likes that novel. Anyway,
I like many stories.
Okay.
I don't like the act of reading, and so that's different.
I understand. Just
okay.
talk. Just keep talking.
And so I think what that displayed, and there's other narratives that display this one, and other research that does. But I think why people relate to it so much is because it really is human nature, is that we want a hierarchy. We actually don't want freedom. We don't want to be dictating ourselves. We want to be subjugated by an authority that says you must do X, Y, and Z. It's the reason why people spend thousands of dollars to go to college. They go to college to simply be enslaved by other people, and so they could have a job in which you have an authority figure, which is your boss, that tells you when to shit, when to piss, when to take a day off, when to do whatever. You go to an average person and be like, hey, just start your business. The first thing they'll be like, with what? What am I going to do? So just start it, man. It's ultimate freedom. You have no bounds. You have no authority. Just do it. Just do it. Whatever it is, just do it. Most people shit their pants, right? Okay. Most people are like, I don't know what to do, because freedom in that sense is scary. It's actually contrary to human nature. Human nature is subjugating oneself to an authority, to a good in which they want to be, existing in. and be guided in it and grow in it and so on and so forth. And so, in terms of intuition, I would say, we don't really have an intuition of freedom. We don't have an intuition to be free, not in the contemporary sense. A classical sense, I would say we do, in a classical sense that we want to be unified
freedom
with
would just be freedom from vice.
Yeah, freedom from vice, right. But in the contemporary sense that we want to be free, we want no authority, no government. I think that's actually not intuitive. I would say that's counterintuitive of human nature.
Ace, go.
Yeah. So I think those are I think those are actually really good points. My disagreement with you, though, not even disagreement, just more of a clarification. So the anarchist position isn't necessarily the elimination of governance, right? So the anarchists generally make a distinction between governance and government as an institution. Go ahead.
Because that confuses me. Because when I always hear people talking about, they'll say like they're a local anarchist or something. Because anarchism means no rulers.
Right. Yes. It means etymology. That's what it means.
Yes. So I don't think I properly understand what anarchism even is now.
Yeah, what it means now. Yeah.
Because when I think of an anarchist, obviously I know a ton of anarchists online now.
Yeah.
And all fantastic people who I don't think want to literally just burn everything to the ground and sit in a grass field and like that. But that's kind of in my mind. I'm like, an anarchist just wants to like destroy everything and like no one can tell them what to do. So I don't really know what you mean by anarchism when you say it.
Okay. So I can actually clear that up real quick. So there's this one philosopher who's one of my favorites. He's actually an Aristotelian too. Roderick Long. He's an anarchist philosopher. His description of anarchism can be summed up in one sentence, which is that other people should not be treated as your property, right? We can like extrapolate that, but what it really means is that in relation to other people, you have the best claim to you, I have the best claim to me, they have the best claim to themselves. And what that means is that to interact for us to justly interact, we must do so voluntarily with each other. We can't like initiate aggression against each other because that would usurp their rightful claim to their body. So why the anarchists oppose the state in some sense is because of that like prior like axiomatic starting point, and then it kind of becomes deduced from there. So anarchism isn't merely just statelessness. It's like statelessness is necessary for anarchism, but it's not alone sufficient for it, right? So, for example, in a stateless society, you could theoretically have a mafia ruling people, and the anarchists would not see that as legitimate either, in the same way that they wouldn't see the state as legitimate.
So what would like? Because obviously there are different degrees of anarchism. What would like a real educated anarchist want? Is there praxis?
Oh yeah.
Is there a positive? Okay.
So, do you mean like as an end goal for society?
Yeah. Is there because obviously anarchism is anti-state as I understand it, but I don't know what the positive, like what you were saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sure. So the anarchists believe that society is best left to private forces, and this could be anything. When I say private forces, I don't just mean business. It can be left to like churches. It could be left to mutual aid associations, general social forces like that do not have a monopoly on violence of coercive power in a society in relation to the state. So the anarchists believe that you can separate these social functions that are currently monopolized by the state and essentially bring them into the private sphere of people where they can create social harmony through these private interactions better than the state can do so. There's a multitude of reasons for this. One, the state as a monopoly is inefficient because it in the same way that any monopoly is inefficient, right? So if you have like a shoe monopoly, because there's no competition between this monopoly, there's no one else making shoes. There's no way to judge how good of a job you're doing, and there's really no incentive to do better because no one else has anywhere to go for shoes in the first place, right? So all the state's social functions are monopolized, and this produces a very bad incentive structure for them because it's like they can treat you horribly and they have no incentive to actually do better. Whereas if you decentralize their functions into a more social, the social sphere, I guess, you could have competitions, and the competition would essentially restructure the incentives to produce better results. It doesn't mean it would always produce better results, but if you look at just the incentive structure, it's more likely to produce better results.
So I have a question. So
yeah,
I obviously monopoly on violence is like one of the top 10 like buzz phrases in like anarchist discussion. Like I hear it all the time. Does monopoly on violence just mean that if an entity has monopoly on violence, does that mean it's the only entity, it's the most powerful entity to the degree that it's the only one that could realistically win in any kind of conflict?
It's more so, I should correct this because I often slip up on this, and I think a lot of anarchists do too. When I say monopoly on violence, what I mean is a monopoly on legal violence. So it's the institution in some sense that has risen to the top and has instituted, they are the only one who legally is allowed to commit violence in that society.
Okay, because I was going to say, so what would an anarchist think about two guys living alone on an island? One's 5'4" and emaciated, and the other guy's like 6'5" and a bodybuilder. Like one guy has monopoly on violence in that case, but I guess if it depends on the law, that would be a different thing.
Yeah. So
I guess again, it would just go back to the solution part that I would have disagreement is that in the solution that if you put it in this private sphere, the assumption is that then there wouldn't be a monopoly on violence, and I just think that's.
Well,
false.
I think that he's saying legal monopoly on violence.
No, even if it's legal though, because if you eliminate the state and you put that power towards the private sphere,
the private sphere just still gets to decide what you can do and not do.
Because ultimately, what's going to happen, as what we've seen in third world countries where the government is so weak that the private companies have like in Peru, so my family's from Peru. Like we used to watch the news in Univision and Telemundo and everything when I was growing up, all the time with our parents. And most Latin American countries function this way: is that the government is so corrupt and so weak that the private companies have more power, way more power than the government. And they literally kill each other. Yeah. It's like it's even worse than I would say any authoritative, strong government has functioned better than a state where the government is nearly non-existent and the private organizations run the damn country. Those places are fucked. They're just fucked. They compete with each other, and competition without the possibility of going to jail.
Pablo Escobar's the private sphere.
Yes. I mean, competition without the possibility of going to jail literally means I'm going to kill them. It would be Walmart killing Target or vice versa, because there's
a bunch of guys in red vests and blue vests.
Because they're literally that's the way it functions. I remember that story with Chippendale dancers. I don't know if you saw. I saw this whole documentary on it, and it's the same thing. Is that the moment that these private organizations becomes above the law, they
wait. Chippendale dancers were above the law.
It was bad. It was bad. It's an amazing documentary that you could watch. But yeah, and so yeah, you could see places, especially in the 1980s,
like Channing Tatum.
Yes. Well, New York in the 1970s and 80s was a shit show, and I've been watching like a lot of documentaries on that, and it was just
Son
like
of Sam is a good.
Yes,
one.
I mean the police they just didn't have any power over these people. There was like this porn district, the prostitution district. There was everything, and these people were running those neighborhoods. They were running the city. And normally when you see private spheres running the city, it is not only just as violent as a state running it, but probably more so. Because the thing about the private sphere, again, it's dictated by profit. It's dictated by, I want what you have. That's all it is. It's a desire to take the good of somebody else. And so you manufacture something and you convince that person that this manufactured item is valuable enough for you to give me what you want, right? And so this is what I was saying about Rothbard is that, you know, I have been an entrepreneur for a long fucking time, a long time. I've interacted with other entrepreneurs. I have, you know, lived my life in this way.
I mean, business.
Business, yes.
There's a less gay way to say
okay,
that.
Yes. But entrepreneurs are not. I have not met an entrepreneur that isn't just out for blood. They all are. And what they want is that they look at what other people have and it's like, I fucking need that. I need that. And they look at the competitions like, I fucking want that. And so you manufacture things so that other people can give you your money. And so what I normally tell people, like if I hire them or for a shoot or whatever, or if I'm interviewing them, the one thing I always make clear to them is that, business sales, particularly because sales is the heart of business. Sales is what making the money. Sales is it's the same kind of game that you play to get pussy. It's that you are presenting yourself.
Teach Ace how to get pussy.
It's that you're presenting yourself as an individual that is worth inserting your dick inside of them, right? It's that you're doing everything that they make. So, okay, if you could convince somebody that your dick should be in them, whether it's a
Ace
pussy
is like on his steno pad
or an anus,
writing all this down
right?
now.
If you could convince them of that, you could convince them of giving you money.
What if we did a sideshow where you give people dating advice?
Because that's all it is. All it is like it's banter. It's making them feel good. It's relational. It's all these things, and all it is it's a game to get something out of them. And so when if you remove the possibility of being in prison for that, it's gonna go crazy. It's gonna be just insane. And I think that's what we have seen evidentially. That's what we've seen in Latin American nations. I mean, maybe you could say that the libidos of Latinos are much higher than the Anglos, and so they're going out for blood even more. So fine, but I think even with the Anglos and the Saxons, it's gonna come down to I'm gonna destroy you. I'm gonna take everything that you have, and I'm gonna put you down 6 feet under, and I don't give a shit because nobody's gonna put me in jail. That is the way that it is. Like if I knew I wasn't gonna get in jail, I would go to my competition, I would bash their windows and steal shit. Hands down. I know I would. If I knew there was no way of me going to jail, 100%.
He's Fed posting.
Yes. I was like, fuck you. Okay, yeah. Let me take my gun. I'll be like, hey, Wesley, you want to go? He'll be like, yeah, let's go. I just go in there with my gun, steal
But you're
shit.
not going to because you'll get arrested.
Right, because I'll get arrested. That is the only thing that will be stopping any business owner from doing the same to the competition.
All right, Ace, go.
Yeah, so I think like your concerns are certainly like accurate. You're not like here's how I always describe it. There's a lot of really good criticisms of anarchism, but the problem is all the criticisms of anarchism boomerang back at the state more. They boomerang back harder. So in the terms of anarchism, you always have to imagine, okay. People always bring up, okay, well, anarchism, you could just have another private force take over and just become the de facto state, right? And it's sort of like what you're describing. But under the anarchist framework, there would still be like cost, right? So you're right that private businesses are like directed towards profits, right? That's the main goal. But the difference between the private sector and the state is that the costs are localized to that person, right? The business owner. So in the case of the state can use violence against you, and it's not as costly for them because they don't actually have they're getting a constant supply of money no matter what they do, right? So if you had to put the violence in charge of people and private individuals, they have to bear the cost of that violence, generally speaking. I mean, maybe you could say, well, you have this super like firm that's going to just gobble up everything and then take their money. That's possible, but then again, that's what we have right now with the state, essentially. But when you put it in the private sector, you're much more likely, again, there's no guarantees one way or the other. There's never any guarantees, so I want to make that clear. But you're more likely to see people arbitrate disputes in a more peaceful manner when they bear the costs of the violence. So anarchism isn't saying it's like some free-for-all where everyone can just do whatever they want. There would be a market incentive for people to subscribe to like services where it's like, hey, I don't want to be murdered. Please protect me, right? So you could have services like that. And now going back to like the cost, if they have to bear the cost of that, then they are going to have to, like if one firm wants to attack another firm and they bear their cost, they're more likely to say, well, that's probably not going to be good for business because one, if we start attacking this firm, then all the other firms might start attacking us because they see us as a threat. And then there's this big like cost analysis. So they're more likely to arbitrate.
My thought would be immediately that I would say that most people living here now, conditioned as we are, would be more likely to arbitrate disputes. but they literally stone people in the Middle East for fun. Right. And I can't imagine if you just abolished the state there, that they would arbitrate conflicts.
I would agree that the average person would. I don't agree that the business owners would. I just don't think that.
The dispositionally successful.
Yes, they will kill.
They do.
Yeah, they do already. But I think without law, they will, and they will steal, because it's an opportunity for you to gain power.
They could,
because it is a power struggle. That's the way that is. Yeah. And business is not a happy-go-lucky. I mean, business is basically a means of taking other people's goods in a legal way. That's all that it is. Yes. And so you do things to convince other people. And so you look at the legal bounds and you'd be like, okay, I really like making money. Like that is many times the motivation for a business. I really like making money. And so you construct things so that you can make the max amount of money possible. Yeah. There is no business owner out there that does not think that way. If they didn't think that way, they're just not business owners. There's no way that there would be, because they would just be workers. Because they believe in a certain thing.
I would still say, like, a lot, when you look at a lot of these huge firms in America, I would actually argue that they're so big oftentimes because of the state subsidization. Like, a lot of these firms, a lot of these players in the market get huge state backing, like legal privileges that they would not have necessarily in an anarchist society. So you necessarily would, from the ground up, if there was an anarchist society, you necessarily wouldn't see these huge firms in the same way you do right now, because starting from that sense, I still think the cost, like there's no guarantees, right? Obviously, like it is very possible that in an anarchist society, some larger force could take over and just reestablish the state. That's obvious. That's perfectly possible. But I still think when we talk about likelihood, because we have to compare it to, okay, let's compare the violence the state has committed over time to the violence a private firm could commit right now. The state in the 20th century killed 200 million people, right? And that's a fairly conservative estimate. I don't see businesses...
Do you mean like the Chinese and the Soviets and like...
all states everywhere in the 20th century.
Yeah, at least 200 million. Way more than that.
Right.
And that's the conservative estimate, yeah. So when you consider that, it's like, okay... I will concede that there could very well be problems with an anarchist society, and anarchism is not a destination necessarily, right? Because there's always going to be people struggling for power, as you said. It's more of like an orientation,
an ethos.
So, yes. So given that it's the fact that there could be violence, I still think it would be less likely when you have violence in a decentralized network as opposed to when you amass power in a centralized structure. I think that's monopoly.
Only, you see, like those stats are only true when you look at the global scale, right? When you look at wars, if you eradicate that from most Western countries, right? The U.S., you take France, you take Italy, or whatever. Well, maybe Mussolini is a bad example, but you take other ones that didn't have great dictators, right? And then you ask who caused more violence in the citizens, private people or the government. I would bet that it would be private people.
Are you saying there was more homicides among individuals than there were?
Than the government actually inflicting that on their individual people. Now if you don't include the Soviets, because the Soviets,
I was going to say they were really
because the Soviets killed more of the people, Pol Pot,
so you think,
and all these people. What I'm saying is like an average Western nation that didn't have a heavy dictator with socialistic bents.
Yeah.
I would say,
you're saying the Soviets are a bad standard against which to judge states.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I would say Pol Pot
most states are not like as murderous
killing their own people.
Like the Khmer Republic was like a worse example than the average.
Exactly. Yeah. But if you just take the U.S. and say like, okay, how many people has the government killed of their own people, not in a war, but of their own people, compared to what private people in the private sector did to their own people in there? I would say there's been more killing of private people killing other private people than the government killing private people in their own nation. And so, yes, the stats is
aside from the Soviets.
The
communists.
Yes.
Because the Chinese, obviously.
Yes, of course, yeah. Okay. And so I would say there's something flawed with their ideology, obviously. But a general thing. No, I would say there was been more.
Are you saying that communist regimes are way above average in their murderousness towards their own
Yes,
people?
I would say the 20th century was like the bloodiest century.
As far as the state enacting violence.
Yes, yeah.
Do you agree with that, Ace?
Oh, the 20th century was easily the worst century for like state violence, easily.
But if you look at the 2,000 or 3,000 years of Western civilization, I would say there was more people
killing each other
than there was the government killing their own people. If you exclude war, because obviously war is killing other nations.
Right. So Ace now.
Yeah. So I would say I would say that I don't really see why like the distinction needs I don't think we should exclude war necessarily, just because if we're talking about firms fighting other firms, that's a form of warfare, right? Yeah. So I don't see why we should exclude the state's capacity for a war. Like I think the distinction between like the state killing its own people is kind of like an aesthetic difference. It's not, I don't see it as a fundamental distinction. So I would still say we should count the states going to war in regards to how many people they kill and how many people they have a capacity to kill specifically versus how many in the private sector have a capacity to kill.
The reason why I would say that is because we don't really have any evidence of a lawless nation of just private corporations going to wars with other nations. And so if we did have that comparison, then we could see it better. And the reason why is because there is no civilization that doesn't have a form of hierarchical government. And so because...
So how do you define government?
Government, there's three forms of government, right? There's there's monarchies, there's aristocracies, and then there's we have democratic, right? And so with those three forms...
This is Platonic.
Yes, you could have distorted forms of that, right? You could have tyranny, which is a distorted form of monarchy. You could have oligarchy, which is a distorted form of aristocracy. And then you could have mob rule, which is a distorted form of democratic society. And so, I would say those are the three forms of governments that we know of. Yeah. And most civilizations have existed with that. I can't say all because I don't know all civilizations, but I would say the ones that are recorded and the ones that we have researched, they have all existed with that kind of civilization. And so if we want to make a comparison of how an anarchical society would exist with other anarchical societies, I would say we really don't have any data to compare those. And so when we bring war into the factor, we're bringing in a different structure of one nation going against another nation. And there's no reason for anyone to believe that if you were to eliminate the governments, that there still wouldn't be large or even small companies of variety of different local nations competing with the other ones and still going to war with one another. I would say you could still probably would find that same kind of atrocities in that sphere, but we just don't know. We just don't know because we don't have any evidence or any data for that. And so that's why I would say take war off of it, because most times when you talk about anarchy, you're talking about your own country or you're talking about nations in general. And so you're saying if a nation were to exist more harmoniously, you would eliminate the coercive nature of the state and give it to the private sector. That is really where the argument comes into play. Not so much that you have two nations battling with one another for property or for oil or for money or whatever, but rather that to live in a harmonious society, you would eliminate the coercion nature of the state. So fine, when you do that, I don't think you can bring in the example of wars. We can only bring in the examples of the tyrannical or the oligarchical or the mob rule of nations, of how they interacted with their own citizens, and then take that into account the way that other organizations within the private sphere have interacted with their citizens and how citizens interact with one another. That's the only reason why I would say war would not be necessarily a good factor in that, because we just don't have any evidence of anarchical societies coexisting with one another. We just don't know what that would be like.
I actually do think there is an example of this, and it's states themselves, countries themselves. So countries exist anarchically in relation to other countries. Heads of state.
Yes.
So
that's true.
So heads of state, like the world, if you because anarchism is relational, right? So my relation to you two right now is anarchical. I'm not, no one, you guys aren't ruling over me. I'm not ruling over you.
But what if Jeremy could beat me up?
Well, he could. He has the potentiality to do that, but unless he actualizes it, it's
but if
not
he beat me up,
actually-
that's not because I.
Oh, yeah,
if I'm not
correct.
like beat
If he
me
did.
up, and then he beats me
Okay.
up. Okay.
Yeah, if he
I'm
did, then that would not
I'm
be
purely curious because I'm learning
Okay,
where
yes,
the
yes.
line is
yes.
between
Yeah, if he did
anarchism
beat
and
you-
not. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
if
not
he did beat you
anar-
up, that would not be an anarchist relation. Yeah. So,
She
so
looked
states-
you up and down. He's like, yeah, he could. Okay. He's got like
So-
boob-sized pecs. Anyway.
so countries in relation to other countries, if you just ignore the state's relation to the citizens, right? We take the citizens out for a second, and we just talk about the heads of state in relation to other heads of state. The international world is anarchic. It's an anarchist civilization, which is the entire Earth. If you take it at a state level, countries.
Is that only a
countries, right?
present thing? Because I would not say that. Well, I don't know how do they exist
Well,
anarchically as
basically,
opposed
basically
to.
that other nations are not controlling the other nations. I mean, to a certain
And because
extent,
I
there's-
mean,
we
right
do.
now, kind of.
I mean, yeah,
There's no
you
world.
normally had empires. Like the U.S. is a type of empire. Obviously, we have
Yeah.
bases
Oh, yes,
in
it is.
Italy. We have bases in France.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Name them all.
So
Yes, we.
yeah, oh yeah, the U.S. is absolutely an empire. But the point is that it's there's no monopoly on. There's no world government controlling the other governments, telling them how they must interact. When two countries have a dispute, now we always know that obviously sometimes they do go to war, but oftentimes when countries have a dispute, they don't go to war. We just don't hear about it, right? It's just never
Anymore.
It's not newsworthy anymore.
Anymore.
Yeah, anymore.
Yeah.
That's right. So oftentimes when they have a dispute, they appeal to they'll either work it out between themselves or they'll appeal to some other third party that they'll arbitrate it with. And that's essentially like how anarchist dispute resolution works, right? So the governments themselves interacting are living in anarchy right now. So if it is impermissible for, Rothbard has this great quote where he says, like, if it's permissible for America and Canada to be separate nations, then why not New York and New York City, right? Okay, now why not New York City and and just keep dividing the districts within New York City? You keep dividing them over and over until you get down to one person. Right, ultimately, because anarchism is essentially you could reframe anarchism as essentially no, we want 7.5 billion states. Right. And that's now whether you think that's realistic or not, that's kind of not the point. But it's just the point that from a theoretical model, we already have anarchism in the sense of states interacting with each other. And again, sometimes they go to war because obviously no anarchist is trying to say that this will never happen or there'll never be violence. But it's just like the anarchist says that we'll be able to resolve disputes.
Beautiful.
You got it, Amanda?
Yep.
Awesome. She's
Okay.
good.
Continue.
All right. Should we say the computer turned off we were using for the
Yeah,
Zoom call?
yeah.
So
Yes.
Ace is going to rehash a little bit of what he was saying.
Yeah. So states are anarchist in relation to each other in the sense that there's no world government above them dictating how they must interact, right? So if you can have countries that are separate from one another on the world stage, why can you not have individuals who are legally sovereign from each other in relation to others? If it's permissible for America and Canada to be separate, why not jurisdictions within America and Canada be separate from those respective countries? And then why can't you keep necessarily dividing it down? Now maybe you might say there's practical problems with it, but in theory, the anarchist system does actually work, and in fact, states run on the anarchist system in relation to each other. And there also have been anarchist civilizations like Kospaya is one of my favorite, if I can mention that real quick. It actually resulted from it was an accident. Pope Eugene IV was trying to sell I think he defaulted on some loan or some debt he had to pay off, and he was trying to give some land to the Republic of Florence, and they drew the map wrong, and a little sliver, I don't remember what country it was. Oh God, that's gonna bug me. Whatever. But Kospaya was left essentially stateless by complete accident, and they lasted for close to 400 years with no state whatsoever. They had no state, they had no prisons or police, and they actually became a trading town, like a free market trading town within there. Like they started real small. Like it started as I think 10 families or something like that, something real small. But over time it grew because people were like, oh wow. I can go in here and not get taxed. That's great.
Popes were
so I
named
can run
Eugene?
Yeah.
What nerds?
Yeah. So this was essentially an example of an anarchist society because there was no state, there was no monopoly on violence. When the dispute happened, they settled the dispute through like arbitration from elders. Like if someone had a dispute, and this is often how you see like common law legal systems work. And ancient Ireland, you had Brehon law, things like that, where it's like when two people had a dispute with one another, they would go see a third party, and the third party would arbitrate the dispute to the best of their ability. And whatever they said, it was like, okay, here's the terms, here's what you have to do to become in good standing again in this society.
So, but
if you
what
don't
is
follow these? Oh, go ahead.
What about that arbitration is not submitting yourself to some authority that you've arbitrarily chosen?
Okay, right. So the people who are having a dispute can choose which arbiter they go to. So this is what distinguishes polycentric legal systems from monocentric legal systems. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Polycentric.
Polycentric. So here's then where my next question will come into play, because if you were then would compare the way the nations exist, right? You're saying that the nations, there is no like global government that controls the nation, so these are sovereign. And then simultaneously, you bring up the example of how the 20th century was a bloodiest century of just nations competing with one another. And then again, I would say, then that's an example of how anarchy would exist. So it would just be war, constantly conflict with one another without any world. I mean, there's a reason why like the UN came into play. I'm not trying to defend them. I think they're pieces of shit, whatever.
EU sucks.
But there's a
NATO
reason
sucks.
why. Yes. And why nations during the medieval period were in conflict constantly, or like lords with other, city states. I would say bringing the example how nations are anarchical is a perfect reason of why to say anarchy doesn't work. It's because they're just conflict.
So I would say that's a very good point. But I would say the reason why the 20th century happened was not because they were anarchic in relation to each other. It's for the reasons they were not anarchic, which is that they were not anarchic in relation to their citizens, and they were able to coercively amass all this wealth and resources to go to war with these countries. So that's why they were able to go to war, is because they were not acting as anarchists in relation to their citizens.
But they still were anarchists in relation to each other.
So you said...
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So Ace, you said that these countries did not operate anarchically in relation to each other because they did amass... To their citizens.
Yes.
No, to their citizens. To each other they were anarchic, but not to their citizens.
And what I'm saying is that, like, if how you quoted Rothbard, if Rothbard example was that nations are anarchical with each other,
yes,
and normally, nations going into war with other nations is the bloodiest and the more deadly we could imagine. I would say then a localized anarchy would be would basically mirror the way that these nations exist with one another. Then,
if I can say one thing on that real quick, the difference I think is what I was saying before. Where the reason why we see the 20th century happen as it did is we see like central banking, right? Something like states essentially could only create. Like the central banking is what financed these wars in the first place. It's the type of thing where this would not evolve naturally in a market environment, in a completely decentralized system.
So you don't think it was ideological?
No, it was ideological, but I'm saying that one of the reasons they were able to do it, not the reason why they did it, but one of the reasons why they were able to.
But even if you exclude the 20th century, fine. But nations were in war with one another before the 20th century.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying that they would never I'm not saying there would never be war in an anarchist society. But my point is that it would be less likely because each person in an anarchist society.
I agree. Globally wouldn't be, but locally there would be.
Because I still think local.
Because it would just diminish the scale of war.
It would because if what you're saying is that anarchical governments exist already, like there is no universal government that governs everybody.
Yeah.
And the outcome that we have seen that for the last 3,000 years was war. And then you want to localize anarchy then and say that within nations there should be anarchy. There is no reason to believe, therefore, the outcome would not be war. It would just be war locally. It wouldn't be war globally between nations, but be war locally with other competing, I guess, families, competing companies, competing private sectors.
I think there is a reason why we would not expect it locally, and that's because the cost, when the state goes to war, or when the state makes any mistake, the state doesn't pay the cost. The taxpayers pay the cost, right? So the state has no money of their own. They steal money from the taxpayers in order to fund their expeditions anywhere. So the reason why the states are able to go to war is that they can amass so much from their populace, because the populace are essentially like tax cattle on a big farm. So when they do this, they're able to amass it. Whereas in a decentralized anarchist society, each person, if they wanted to go to war, they kind of have to pay for the cost of that themselves, because there would be no like centralized apparatus unless they made one to extract those resources. So when you were talking about before how like businesses are profit driven, that also comes with the dovetail of that they're also cost driven, right? So they want to maximize profits while decreasing costs to the most amount possible. So
yes, but
violence.
But let me take my business for example, right? So I'm a small business. I'm a small business owner. I'm not a corporation. I'm not anything, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this on air to brag. I'm not. But it's just to help you exemplify. Help me exemplify what your point is. It's only, what is it, the 11th? Today's the 11th, right?
Yeah.
It's the 11th of the month. I have already made over $6,000. The 11th of the month, right? Profit. I'm not talking about, you know, what we charge, but profit. If there was no law containing me from going to my competitor and burning that place down, I would do it, because the cost of it is from the purchasers of my company. What I'm saying is that the way the nations do it is that the cost is on the taxpayers. The cost for the business owner is not mine. The cost is put on my customers, my clients. They pay me to do things. They pay me to record their videos, to take their photos, to sell them products, to set things up, whatever. And so, I push the cost on them. And that I'm saying this, and I'm trying to be as honest as possible, that if I knew there was absolutely no consequence to me, like the government doesn't exist, they're not there to put me in jail, they're not there to stop me, even with that amount of money, just because of the competitive nature that I am. More, like I would say I am an example of just an average small business entrepreneur. We're competitive people. Most of us, you could talk to that person that owns a Aurora Gallery. Same thing. Like I could name
over
people.
By
fucking the Wally Hickle that owns the Captain Cook and all of them. These small business owners, right? They all, like me, played sports. They all, like me, are just competitive assholes. We just are, right?
Jeremy's an asshole.
Yes, I am an asshole. I know that. Like, I'm competitive. When I played soccer through high school, I won MVP every fucking year. Yeah. Right, I am fucking awesome, and I know it. I know I could kick ass, and so whatever I do,
seriously, like what Jeremy says on mic is tame.
Yes,
Ace.
And so that is the nature of much of us entrepreneurs. Sure. Like when people get turned off by Trump, is because he knows he could kick ass in some sort. He's like, hey, I'm here still. I'm functioning. I'm awesome. I do whatever. And so people get turned off by that. And that is because, again, he is also an example of just an entrepreneur, whether it's a large corporate entrepreneur or whether it's a small business owner. The nature of us is competition. We love competition.
Oh, yeah.
It drives us. It's like I wake up in the morning just thinking about the competition, how much ass I could kick, right? And that's
you're like dummy in your bedroom.
It is, yes. You just go out there, and if there was a system in which it alleviated any consequence, I'm telling you, 100%, it would be amazing. Well, no, it would be bad, right? but simultaneously amazing. It would just be us kicking each other's asses. To the point that we're just like, fuck, I'm exhausted. I got to sleep on the sofa for a little bit.
This is how Italians still do business.
It's the way that, it's the way Latinos like us. This is the way we do business.
What I really think, Ace, you would prefer that.
Well, I do want. So I do think I would prefer it in relation to the state's violence. I still think even if anarchism is the chaotic, violent thing that everyone says it, I would still say, well, that's less than the state. So I would still view that as an improvement. But I do have to make one important point here. Anarchism is not necessarily the absence of law, and like a lot of people understandably get confused about this. You see law develop. Law is essentially developed as a way to resolve disputes between people, right? That's like you see this in common law before, like even before it got incorporated and codified into like states' legal standards. Common law, this arose naturally from the ground up for people to resolve disputes. So in anarchist society, it wouldn't necessarily be like you can do anything and free of consequence, right? Everything comes with a cost to it. So if you in an anarchist society, if you went and tried to kill someone, for example, or let's say you stole a bunch of money from a competitor, right, a business competitor, anyone would be justified in making you pay restitution to that person. Now, then you could go into like the practical aspects of it, where it's like, okay, how would they do that? But ultimately, there would be like legal standards that says, no, you can't do that. We're going to take the money back.
But who's enforcing that law?
Any like firm could necessarily enforce it. Like any firm could say, okay, you're in violation of
then
this.
I would kill
an
them.
arbiter. Okay. Well,
no, I'm being serious. I would just kill them then.
Okay,
this wouldn't exist.
No, I understand.
But I feel like, and I feel like you could say that about anything, right? You could say that was like, no. I feel like I could come back and say, well, no, they would go after you more. You know, it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like if I say,
no, yeah, because
okay,
I don't want to go to jail, right? I just don't want to go to jail,
right?
And so I know I can't just go out there and kill every military person. Right. I know I cannot kill every government official, whatever. And so that's going to restrain.
I have been edging.
Okay.
Okay.
Now 20, I want to know what that
25. 25. You want to know what edging is? You don't know what edging is?
No, I do now.
When did you learn?
Like
what do you mean you do
2
now?
weeks ago.
That's coincidental.
Yeah.
This isn't a Slurp Gang.
Well,
theme.
I don't.
I understand.
I don't
Where did you learn that?
From Josh.
Stop talking to Josh.
Because I don't masturbate, and so it's not something that I'm careful. Okay.
So I have been ideologically edgy.
Okay.
I'm not. Don't check under the table. I'm fine. But quite unaroused. But 25 minutes now. I want to know.
Yeah.
Because this is a question I want to ask. I think, Ace, I respect your intellectual honesty.
Oh, definitely.
A lot. Ooh, that was good. Jeremy likes you. You're in the club.
Of course, yeah.
Good. Okay.
Him and that
you're in the club. I didn't know.
The other guy. Who was the other guy?
Barrett.
Barrett. Yes. Also
of
very
Contained Podcast.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, when you're talking about the state versus. Is it state power versus private power to you, or is there like a different line somewhere?
There is a different line. So state power is the most obvious. So the state power is the most obvious, apparent example of this. But there could also be private actors who also, violate rights just like the state does from the anarchist perspective. So we would be opposed to those, but we're opposed to the state because it's like, in some sense, like if you incorporate coercion and aggression, the state is like the telos of that, right? It's the end state. It's like the highest point, the ultimate end of coercion.
So you would probably agree that state power versus social power is a dumb dichotomy.
It's not. Yeah, it's not.
It's not useful.
I agree. Yeah, it's not great.
Okay, because I wanted to see where I don't know if I can tell in my understanding of human nature where the line between either your or your people's as anarchists or whatever your ideal, where are the boundaries of your ideal anarchism as in practice? Like where does, at what, I don't know if even I could offer an example. I don't know where social interaction exceeds the bounds of what you'd accept. Does that make sense?
Yeah. this is a great question. I should have like talked about this earlier more.
No,
more
you're
in depth.
good. You're totally. You guys have been going back and forth on like specific issues, but I don't know where, because when I just etymologically, when I hear the word anarchism and I understand the roots of it, I'm like, okay, a guy that's burned all the buildings down. He doesn't know anybody else. He sits in the woods. And there's no interaction between him and anybody else, because any interaction involves some form of, you would say coercion. I don't know if I'd use that word.
Yeah.
But
there's an
exertion of
power.
Like just in my personality and how I operate, every single interaction I have with a person is me imposing myself on that person. And I don't know if that's just dispositional, if I'm a psycho.
I wouldn't say that, and I want him to discuss it.
Yes, I'm curious where
just
the
before
line
he says
is.
it, I would say this is where I would bring in Nietzsche's, the village.
You're going to invoke Nietzsche?
Yes.
Whoa.
This will to power, but. Okay. But anyways, I want him to discuss that first.
Yeah. No. Do you understand my question? Do you have a?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so this is kind of like the groundwork, right? So so the boundaries in a sense is that the anarchists, when they're talking about rulers, they're not merely talking about, if I say, hey, go get that thing for me over there, right? That they wouldn't really say that person's a ruler, because there's no real consequence if I say, there's no violent consequence if I say no. There might be, but there isn't by default, right? So just someone ordering someone to go do something, that itself would not be a ruler. When they say no rulers, what they're really getting at is the idea of a person who uses violence to encroach into the boundaries of another person. And the boundaries, as you were getting at, Grant, it would be like, okay, I have so like if someone assaults me, right? Yeah. They are essentially using my body when I have the highest claim to my body.
That's what assault is?
Yes. Okay. Or it's battery technically. If someone hits me in the face,
causes damage to my body.
Causes damage to my body.
That I've not voluntarily
accepted.
Consented to.
Yeah.
That's right.
If I want to get beat up, that's
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not that one ought to not beat me up. Or not. That's not the deciding factor. It's whether or not I want to be beat up.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether or not I consent to it. Okay.
Well, yeah. So, and then if we talk about like property from a property ownership perspective, it'd be like, I incorporate these external resources into my ongoing projects. And these things become essentially, in some way, a metaphorical way, an extension of my being. So that would be like the... Go ahead.
No, what were you? I want you to finish your sentence.
I was just going to say, once the property gets... So you assert a right to a person's autonomy, essentially, and then you assert, okay, from that, when we incorporate resources, this essentially becomes an extension of our being, so this kind of gets incorporated into our idea of personal autonomy. And therefore, it's not justified for another person to encroach without consent into those boundaries.
But is it based on consent purely whether or not an action is justified?
No. The reason why consent itself would be there's two things here.
Yeah.
We believe in a moral right to the person's body, right? So that's actually the start. It's not the consent itself. It's the fact that I have a right to the body, and because I have a right to the body, that means that by de facto, I have a right to consent or not to another person's use of it.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask Jeremy to not say anything because I'd like to offer a line of questioning.
Okay.
So obviously, consent is a huge factor in anarchist-leaning ethics.
Yeah.
Would you say that the goodness or evil of an action is dependent, it's on consent primarily, or can an action be good or not, whether or not you consented to it?
Yeah, you can have an action be good even if... So, like, an example of this, right, would be, like... So there's a distinction between rights. So rights overlap with, like, in an ethical way. Rights would overlap with morals, but they're not one-to-one with them. So an example I use is that I might be within my rights, from an anarchist perspective, I might be within my rights to yell at my grandmother, but that wouldn't necessarily make it a good thing, right? And so
well, especially in your yelling, if you're exerting influence on her in a way she hasn't consented to, would be anti-anarchist.
In a certain sense. So when they say so. Under anarchism, not all anarchists agree. Some social anarchists would actually generally take a different view, but most anarchists would say that the influencing someone is not necessarily, like, imposing influence itself is not necessarily aggression, or it's not necessarily a rights violation.
So why? Can you explain that really quick?
Yes, because it's influence. Like it depends on how the influence manifests, right? If it's coercion, if it's like, hey, do this, or I'm going to like burn your house down, or do something like that, that would be an aggression because they have a right to their property.
Is coercion only physical, or is it also? Can you do it like emotionally with something?
Well, you can do. Well, you can do it emotionally, but the anarchists are only really talking about the physical form of coercion.
Okay,
right.
That's
you know what I mean?
What I'm interested in, because
yes,
so aside whether or not we're talking about anarchism or not, I'm curious about I think that we're moving into our wheelhouse a little bit. Mm-hmm. You kind of know where I'm going a little bit. Would you say that you agree or disagree with the statement that the moral qualification of an action is dependent on something objective that precedes people, or whether or not it was consented to?
It precedes people.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because I tend to find libertarians and anarchists to be very morally relative.
Consent. Yeah, right.
Very consent. Because you're talking about consent, and like consent is obviously significant when you're talking about interrelational ethics and stuff. But when you're talking about if an action is good or not, I would say it's whether or not that action is in accordance with the nature of the action or not, or the nature of people, or the nature of reality, or whatever. Which I think you'd agree with.
Yeah. So the reason, like, I think the reason it precedes people, or the reason why consent matters to the anarchist, or at least in my understanding, is that it's because they have a moral right. So the moral right to one's body precedes one's ability to consent.
Okay. Right? And I think Jeremy and I would both agree that you don't actually have a right to your body.
Okay, yeah.
We would say that other people don't have the right to kill you and ought not.
Yeah.
But we don't. Like, we literally, we've made the argument episodes ago. You'd have to listen to the whole thing to figure out where it is. I don't know. But, like, you don't have the right to life. You have no one else has the right to kill you.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I would agree
with positive right to life.
Okay.
I would agree with that completely.
Yeah, Ace, I'm interested.
Yeah,
okay, what were you saying?
Yeah, the right to life is essentially a right not to be murdered. That's my understanding of the right to life.
But I don't think that's how people conceive of it when you call it the right to life.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
When you call it right to life, you say that you have a right to life, which is incoherent.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Right.
But I would say, okay, so my real question to anarchists and libertarians and stuff is, I agree that many of the states of the 20th century, even in the 19th century, the empirical governments and stuff, Japan, Russia, Germany, Italy, before the, especially those kind of late bloomers in modern society. I agree that they did not treat their citizens with the proper respect of their humanity and stuff like that. Yeah. But I don't know. Man, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm a little wind up.
Me too.
But I'm really trying. You're good? Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a milestone.
I know.
That's good.
That's
okay,
beautiful.
So I'm curious. When I'm talking about consent, I agree that those go. Oh, I found it. This is something I've gotten better at talking to Jeremy, because he's really good at making a point, talking for 20 minutes, and then going like a stand-up comedian back to the thing they're saying. So I agree that like I could list in a huge number of regimes that I think were especially evil in the 19th and the 20th century, late 19th and 20th century. But I agree that those were evil.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I see in anarchism, or the examples offered, are a reaction to those things, which I think is proper.
Right. Yeah,
I think what I see in it, or what I hear, is how the hell do we keep this from happening again? What kind of prescriptive philosophy can we offer to try to mitigate the risk of the Khmer Republic ever happening again? Like Pol Pot murdering a third of his population in fields, literally. I get that. But I don't... So... But why does a state intrinsically not have a right to say, coerce people to do the right thing? Because Jeremy and I would say we're both theocrats. Like, we're essentially okay, let the Catholic Church take over everything again and
not
coerce
everything, just the
social institutions like hospitals and schools and stuff.
Yeah.
But they can still coerce, but they're coercing people to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Is there a world in which is it the coercion itself that makes it wrong?
Fundamentally, what I'm saying is that there has to be a system that is not gaining something.
Okay.
And so the thing about the market is that the market...
And Ace, you would agree with that? Would you agree with that? Or
which
no?
aspect?
The gaining something. It's the gain. It's if you could devise a system of government that didn't gain something as profit or status or whatever, then maybe...
So let me just... Let me just express a few things. Like, the one thing that I've noticed about many self-proclaimed anarchists is that, I'm not saying this to like kiss ass or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that most anarchists that I have met are just intrinsically good people. They're people.
Yes, that's what, and I think I was saying that earlier. Is that everybody I know online,
right?
And like they would. I could call them at 4 a.m.
Exactly.
Be like, I have a flat tire. They get in their car.
There's
and
someone
go.
like the fucking Joe, right? Joe who thinks
Joe is literally
yes, he is. And so you meet most of these people anarchists, but like, they're just good people.
Yeah.
They look at the behaviors of most people like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Right. That is what their idea is. And so what I have noticed is that they're doing the basic principle in psychology is called projection. So they're thinking that there has to be some system that isn't this fucked up. And so they kind of point towards the social system. They point towards the market and be like, these people aren't this fucked up. They can't. This
is why I think the anarchist sphere on Twitter generally is so kind to each other.
Yes, because they're generally good.
There's really
right.
Okay.
And so it's hard for them to get into the psyche
of someone who's not
of just us.
Yeah,
it's hard. I'm sorry. It's hard. It's like they look at us.
We're fucked up guys.
Yes, we're fucked up people. and what I'm saying is that like 80% of people are just this way.
If Jeremy imagines that if he had agency over his own life with no law, he's like, whoa.
Yes,
like shudders. In his bed.
Like the anarchist will be like, well, I would just, why would I want to control that person? They have their autonomy.
This is I also think there's an assumption that people have the moral intelligence that I think that.
But the average person, what I'm saying is that the average, and this goes back to
Ace
Nietzsche.
is leaning forward, so finish your point and we're going to let him talk.
And this is where I'm saying that Nietzsche has a point.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so crazy to hear you say.
I think Nietzsche was one of the greatest prophets of the 19th and 20th century. And part of it is because the one thing he understood, like I don't agree with any of his prescriptions, but he understood human nature. He understood that.
He predicted that
he did. Yes,
states would kill hundreds of millions of people.
He predicted so much shit. And the reason why he predicted it so well is because he understood what is it that the average human being has in his heart. The average human being has this, this. I love it in German, like this, der Wille zur Macht. This will to power.
So funny.
Der Wille zur Macht. It's this gross.
It's such a Germanic idea.
It is. Yeah. It's like this gross, just wanting to have this dominion over things whatever it may be, other people, over the self, over your mind, over animals, over the earth. It's this will to power. This
it makes
macht,
sense of materialism
right?
of the 20th
It
century.
is,
the
yeah.
Postmodernists, and it makes
and this, what I would say is what's in the root of just the human heart.
In a fallen world.
Yes, because so if I go back to Plato, when people read Plato's Republic, the funny thing is that many people skip chapter 2. Chapter 2 in Plato's Republic, he talks about what he thinks the actual ideal government is. You know what he says?
What?
There is no government. He says the ideal government is that we're sitting in a grass making love.
So what did I just say?
Loving,
I
yes.
said sitting in grass.
It is.
Okay.
And this is what Plato says. And so his republic.
You literally said that?
Yes. His republic.
I've never read
is
it. That's
literally
so
his like pragmatic form of
Is
government.
everything's burned down and he's sitting in the woods?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like you like but
Was Plato an anarchist, Ace?
In his ideals, he is actually.
Okay.
He says that
Yeah.
if everybody were philosophers,
Yeah.
if everybody were just innately good people, there would be no reason to have an
Which is
authority
literally the
figure.
Christian argument.
It is, right,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Is that there would be no reason for this. The issue that I have with Rothbard and most anarchists is that most of them have the innate inclination to not be a fucking asshole. That's it. Is that they have the inclination. So they're thinking to themselves, if I owned a business, I'm making something and these people want it and we're just having a trade with one another, right?
And Jeremy's like, but I'm an asshole.
Yes.
And
but-
you don't
yes, and
want
what I'm saying
me
is that
to operate outside
What
the
I'm saying-
bounds of
yes,
the
what I'm saying,
law.
Murray, you do not understand human nature.
Yeah.
That is not.
So the anarchists are the good ones.
Yes, what I'm saying is that they're innately
I'm glad I
good.
figured that out.
They're innately good, but the average person, that's not the way they're going to behave. They're dicks.
Okay.
People want power. They want
'Cause
this,
my
this
argument-
power over others, this power over themselves. You know, like they work on it, like they read these self-help books and they're like, I need power over my emotions. I need power over this. I need to know what you fuck a fucking
habits
bitch. You
of
know,
whatever
you know,
people.
to be balls deep in those bitch. You know, you're thinking about these things, and this is the average person. They're fucking dicks. They're assholes. Yeah. And so this is why I'm saying that it doesn't work. It doesn't work because fundamentally they're all out for blood. They're all out for pussy. They're all out for what the fuck everybody else has. They look at it and be like, I want your car. I want your house.
Everybody's like,
I want your woman. I want your fucking life. And I'm going to make this thing to convince you to give me your life.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's egotistical and it's gross and it's disgusting, and to give them any kind of power and this is
or agency.
Agency, yes.
Equal agency.
This is why why in the discussion with Rothbard, I brought back Augustine.
Yeah.
Because in the end, what he is saying is that is people. That's human nature. This is the way people function. Mm-hmm. If the world were filled with philosophers, if they were filled with people like you, if they were filled with them...
Ooh, he really likes you, Ace.
It would be a beautiful world because people would not be exploiting one another.
He's never said this to me.
People would not be... Yeah, because you're an asshole like I am.
Damn it.
And so people would not be exploiting one another.
Everybody would hate themselves if the world was filled with me.
People would not be doing these things, and it would be a wonderful world.
Okay. So nice guys.
But the world is not filled with that type of people.
Yeah.
There is
I don't
no
disagree
way.
with that.
There's no way that we could have that. And so we need a system where there's tension.
Yeah.
Tension is the solution, what I am saying.
Yes.
It's that you have...
This is a weird...
Well, you have this state and social power in tension with one
So
another.
I've talked to Ace about this
then
personally.
You have the goodness.
In response to a Rothbard episode,
Yes.
he described anarchism as could you say, an eternal struggle
Yeah,
between...
it's a Sisyphean struggle.
Yeah, I would say
like,
that. But the one thing that Rothbard is missing is what
Well,
Augustine...
he's not Ace is not a Rothbardian.
Okay, fine.
Right?
Well, I really like Rothbard.
Yeah, okay.
So I
But
mean, if you
what
called me
he's
Rothbardian,
missing-
I wouldn't object.
What Rothbard is missing is Augustine's city of God. He is missing the notion that there is in existence a reality, a possible reality, not one that's actualized, but a possible reality where people are not dicks.
Yeah.
where there is this beauty of just giving, where there's an institution that is not expecting anything from you, but is just giving. And that institution has to be in conflict with both the city and the state. And that is the one that keeps it bound to some sense of just normalcy, some sense of beauty. You know, and I say this to many people, there's a reason why in both the East and the West, what's that form of government?
Feudalism?
Both Eastern and Western feudalism existed.
Jeremy and I are both theocratic feudalists.
Yes. The reason why feudalism existed for the majority of both Eastern and Western existence is because there was this tension. You had Confucianism, where you had Confucianism in the East. And Confucianism was a structure of respect, a structure of beauty, a structure that had nothing to gain in itself, but had everything to lose. And you have the West, where you have the Catholic Church that instituted every university, that produced music, that produced these churches that had nothing really to gain but everything to lose. You have the Eastern Orthodox reality, the same fucking thing. And then you had the state and the yes, that you have this eternal struggle of the the city of man, as Augustine says, and the city of God. The city of God that does not gain but only gives, and the city of man that wants this trade. It was like, hey, I got something beautiful behind this curtain. Give me your fucking money. Whether it's the state or the market, give me your money. And I'm going to give you this beautiful thing, and then you will be happy. You need that tension. You need the tension of the one has nothing to gain.
I want Ace to explain this, because this is a weird... You guys would word it very differently.
Right.
There's a weird parallel between the way you're both thinking.
Yeah.
So Ace, talk to me about the struggle between state and social power.
Sure. Yeah. So I think this is something a lot of people misunderstand about anarchists, because some people will look at anarchism for a brief moment and they'll say, "Oh, this is really utopian," and
which I say still.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. But I don't think if it's utopian, I don't think it's any more utopian than what anyone else believes. So, for example, even so, the anarchist struggle against the state isn't saying that we'll get to a society one day where we won't have a state anymore. We won't have problems. There will always be people. There will always be. So I agree 100% with human nature, right? In fact, one of the strongest anarchist arguments in my opinion, is the argument from human nature, because it's there's that classic argument which is if all men were angels, there would be no need for government. Right. It's okay, if we assume most people are just bad and out for themselves, then the last thing you would want is to coalesce that power into a monopoly on violence where they can legally aggress against you and they suffer no consequences for doing so. But as far as the eternal argument goes, it's even if someone came to me or a time traveler came back and said in 10,000 years there's still states, it wouldn't really change my view of states, right? It wouldn't say, oh well, I guess it just doesn't work. In the same way that imagine most people are opposed to murder. We'll never live in a world without murder. Yes. Right, but we're still opposed to it all the same.
Well,
we're still
yeah.
We're still you're right. Yeah. But in this world, So
good shit. Make your point.
No, sorry.
It's me.
Anyway,
gay bitch.
No. But in the same way that you always have the struggle. So it's if most people would say that, well, I would be an anarchist, but I just don't see any attempt at I don't see it realistically playing out. It's okay, well, we're not going to have a world without murder, but I would still think most people would be against murder all the same. And most people are against murder, even though it doesn't. We know it's not going to,
it's the ultimate evil action, essentially.
Right. So it's okay, even if that's true, that we're never going to reach a stateless society, it's still something, it's an ethos we can orient ourselves towards throughout as we take actions.
Right. I have a question.
But let me just say one thing. But what I think what the anarchist is desiring is exactly what I'm saying. The anarchist is desiring a state where there's a tension between an actual reality of love and then the reality of coercion.
And can you define love for the listener?
Love is the willing the good for the other in the absence of the self.
Yeah. So self-sacrifice.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
And so you people are desiring this, and this is why I'm saying that most anarchists I speak to are just inherently good people. Mm-hmm. And it's because
there's just like an intuitive understanding of
there's an intuitive understanding.
It is your responsibility as a human being to like sacrifice yourself for the other.
The feudal system has existed in this way for over 1,500 years. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason because that simply is what existed.
Yeah.
It was that they understood it. You know, that the classical saying of...
You're saying the feudal system came out of an understanding.
It is, yes.
Theological...
literally both of the East and the West. Yeah. Not just the West, like West within Christianity, but in the East within Confucianism. Yeah. It was this understanding that there was something beyond this.
We're good.
Is it good now? Okay. Yeah, there's something beyond this that is the good. Yeah. And then there's the shit that we're living in. Yeah. And we need that conflict because since we are embodied creatures, since we are hylomorphic beings, both of form and matter, that we need this conflict that is the good and then the shit that's reality. And once we accept that, we can begin to function within that.
So what's your problem with the language he's using? Because it sounds like the intuitive understanding of both is the same, but you guys are speaking in different terms.
The thing that I'm disagreeing is that goodness is found in the market. I'm saying it's
Do you think that goodness is found in the market?
Or social structure,
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it goodness. Here's a way I like to describe markets, right? So markets take a selfish intuition, but it produces valuable outcomes for other people. So, for example, if it turns, it's not altruism in an altruistic sense, is that I'm going to self-sacrifice for you, but it's altruistic in the sense that I'm going to do something else for you, even if it's for, not a great reason necessarily, right? I'm not disputing that. But whenever two people have a trade with each other, and two people trade with something, and, not talking about like if they have buyer's remorse or something, but when two people trade, they both value the other thing more than what they have, right? Or else they wouldn't trade it in the first place. So whenever a trade happens, there's a mutually beneficial generation of wealth or value from both parties whenever there's a trade. If there wasn't, they most likely would not do it in the first place. Yeah. So that's a distinction between the state, where the state, the person engaged in a trade, even if they say, I'm not going to give this to you unless you give me that, they're still not taking anything away from you that you don't have, that they don't already have. The state, on the other hand, does do that. The state says, I'm going to take your wealth, or I'm going to put you in jail if you don't give me your wealth. So you could call that a trade in some sense, but it's... Go ahead.
Quickly, sorry. So it's not just that if you don't pay taxes, you don't get your road maintained.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you don't pay taxes, you don't get your road maintained, and I'm going to put you in jail.
But
that's right. Yes, okay.
But anybody that is a salesperson understands that the goods in which you're selling them, it's just appealing to their pleasure. That's all it is.
And I'm not disputing that it's a good in like a moral sense, right? In the sense that
right, but what I'm saying is the state is doing the same thing.
So can I make a criticism?
The state is saying that you not being in jail is a pleasurable reality. You functioning in society as not an outlaw.
Can I make an observation that's related, but I think is just my general observation of what I find lacking in anarchist discussion? Because obviously, all of my good friends on Twitter now, I spend hours a day on Twitter just passively at work while I'm working and stuff, is about anarchism or libertarianism or whatever word they want to use to describe whatever they're saying. It always comes back to a relational. Yeah. It describes the relation between people. Yeah. Yes. But it doesn't what I see, at least, and I think that could be a result of the fact that I'm seeing people interacting from the same position that I don't necessarily understand. I don't know where anarchism comes from a metaphysical standpoint, one would say. Yeah. I don't know where, like, what because you and I are like, could we say theocratic feudalists essentially?
Yeah.
Because of the metaphysical presuppositions we've arrived at.
Yeah.
Prior to our political axioms, but it seems
like
both
you and I would agree that with him that it should be taken away from the state.
Yes.
But where it is placed is where there's a distinction.
Yeah.
Is that not so much that, okay,
I hate the U.S. government in 2022.
All three of us could say that, okay, this power needs to be removed from the state.
Yeah.
Normally what the anarchist says is that it should be placed then in the market.
Yeah. And
that's where my disagreement is. It shouldn't be placed in the market.
So, Ace, would you agree with that, or do you say that's like a libertarian thing?
Well, okay, so I would agree with it partially, but I do think it's important to. So sometimes when anarchists talk about market, they don't quite adequately define what they're talking about.
Yeah.
When I talk about market, I'm not even merely talking about it, and this is probably something bad on my part because I should define it more. I'm not merely talking about like transactions, right? When most people think about markets, they think about like Wall Street or just transactions, things happening back and forth. I would describe people as so voluntarily spending their time and associating with each other in some sense a market activity, right? In just interacting. It's a loose market activity in the sense there's no transaction, but there's absolutely no coercion involved, and people are in some sense exchanging their time with one another.
Yeah.
But I think Jared would say there is coercion involved.
Well, and the issue is that it goes back to the Protestant notion of religion.
Yeah.
It goes back to like this loose notion that, there's a body of believers of some sort. Yeah. And this is where
that can all have their little scruples with how theology is understood.
And this is where the difficulty lies, because in most of Western and Eastern Europe civilization, that just wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. You literally had another monolithic institution, right? Whether it's the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, you had a monolithic institution that had a building, that had hierarchy, that had a catechism, that had laws.
Well,
that had everything.
it's that
right.
That's Ace. Go.
No, I would actually distinguish because there's a certain sense where I'm fine with that, right? Like in the sense that So like if I'm on my property, for example, right?
Yeah.
And I'm setting rules on my property on who can come on my property. There's a hierarchy there in relation to the person who is not making the rules, right? So it's my property. I get to make the rules. The anarchist is not necessarily opposed to that at all, right? So because from the anarchist perspective, if I have the right to my property, I have the right to exclude you from using it. And if I have the right to exclude you from using it, I have the right to set terms upon your entrance or exclusion based on if you break them. So a church having some internal like hierarchy or and like rules governing who gets in the church and who doesn't, I'm fine with that. I don't think that's anti.
But why is that not anti-anarchist?
Because that's just feudalism. In the end of the day, that's what it is.
What about that is anti-state?
Because that's exactly what I agree with.
And I think that was my question earlier. Is like I don't know where the line is between.
Okay.
At what point does it become the state?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And is it because of the guy who built the building? Like, what's the?
Yeah, it's because like if we assume that I have the highest claim to my body in relation to other people, and I have the highest claim to my property in relation to other people, it would be wrong for others to encroach upon those boundaries. And the reason we're opposed to the state is because the state does encroach upon those boundaries. The state uses violence to encroach into our.
But what if the Catholic Church used violence on?
Oh, if they encroach in the same way like another person encroached, then the anarchists.
You're
internally in the church.
But your definition of whether or not that is acceptable or not is based on consent, or whether or not they voluntarily submitted themselves.
It's based on whether they're usurping the other person's right or not, like to their property or to their body.
But what does it mean to usurp someone else's right?
To essentially ignore their claim. Like if a person.
But
has
let's say that I want my church invaded. Does that's then fine.
If we're just talking about like I want people to come into my building and destroy it type thing.
Like what if I want that?
If it's your building, then the anarchists would say okay.
So what I was getting at a while ago is that I find a lot of anarchist ethics to be quite relative. That there's nothing about the structure of reality that makes an action inherently good or not beyond consent.
I would say that we're not necessarily saying it would be good. We were just saying it's within your rights to do it, right? So the permissibility of enforcing your right is not necessarily it does not necessarily entail the permissibility of enacting the right or doing it. Just in like my analogy of yelling at the grandmother.
Mm-hmm. And what I would say is I'm not talking about permissibility. I'm talking about goodness or not.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm sorry. The anarchists would not necessarily. So the anarchist position on that, they would not necessarily say it's good or bad. They would just say you're within your rights to do it.
Okay,
you were not violating anyone's rights.
That means that anarchist ethics are relative to consent.
Well, no, because because the anarchist ethics are based on a presumption that there is a right that exists to our bodies that precedes our consent to it, right? So, like, if I were to say that, like, the whole reason we believe consent is important in the first place is we believe each person has a moral right to use their body how they wish. And that precedes...
But that's consensual. That entails consent.
Yeah, it entails it, but it's not the starting point.
Okay. But I don't know how that could be the case. I don't understand what precedes that. What about the structure of reality that precedes the consent?
That each person has, so when I say right, I just mean this person has a justified claim or action to use X thing or whatever, right? Okay. So if I say
what's the justification though?
That's so what I'm saying is, what about the structure of reality?
It's a justification for two.
Well, is claim. That yes, yeah? I'm just trying to word it a little bit differently. Yeah. So let's say if you were to like sodomize me,
yeah.
What about that action makes it good or not beyond whether or not it's submitted to? Is there anything about the structure of reality that would make that action good or not, whether or not I wanted it?
So something could be so something you could voluntarily consent to could still be bad in an anarchist sense, right? It wouldn't be a violation of rights.
It's just, I don't know how that could be the case as far as a...
Well, okay,
it's so like relational in nature and how it's been explained to me. I don't know how
because because the anarchist ethic doesn't. It's not like monolithic. It doesn't. It leaves room for other like ethical norms essentially.
So it's not conclusive.
So, no. So it's just trying to distinguish who has the highest claim to use what at what time. Essentially, that's essentially the ultimate foundation of property rights.
So your agreement with me that it's not conclusive, anarchism is not conclusive in its prescription and how people should be, would lead me to be confused about what anarchism is when I reach the bottom of it.
Okay.
Because that's been my weird...
Like to clarify, basically, if it's not conclusive, then it's relative.
Yeah, it's if anarchism is like a word art titled thing doesn't really exist. When people talk to me about anarchism, it's really relative to the person I talk to.
I wouldn't say it's relative because it makes a universalist claim that each person has the highest claim to their own life, right? So that is a universalist
but
claim.
I mean, I kind of. Do you agree with that? I mean,
I would just ask why is that the case?
Because I'm interested in that idea.
Like for example, if I am able to physically dominate somebody else,
why do you not have the right?
Yeah,
to do
why
that?
don't I have the claim to their life?
Right. I think like this always gets tricky when we get into the metaphysics of it. So the anarchist starting point is essentially the anarchists do sort of just axiomatically assert it, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
There are ways you can say, like, I do think there are natural law arguments where you can say by using violence you're not treating the other person as a rational creature in the sense that if we assume that rationality is and living life as a rational animal is man's end, then you're subverting.
Right. So, but that's kind of assuming that the only way that you have dominion over somebody else is through violence. Which I would say is, I mean, as every salesperson knows.
So let's say I live with somebody, and it's completely amicable.
Yeah.
And voluntary, but I pay for everything.
Yeah. And
I do all the work or whatever. And this person subsists off of my income.
Yeah.
I don't know what makes us equal. Like, why do I not have dominion over them?
Right. Yes. But even if you don't go to that length, like your ability to convince somebody, hey, spend $3,000 today as opposed to $50.
Yeah. There's a sales. Okay.
Yeah, right. And
you gotta get a hobby, man.
I work too much.
No, Ace has something to say.
Yeah, but I guess it's like I don't see that the only way to have dominion over somebody's like reality is only through violence. I think
I agree that
most of the times it's through manipulation.
So how do you agree?
Through politeness. I would agree that you can manipulate people to do certain things or certain actions, but or influence them strongly at least. But the anarchist is more concerned with they are more concerned with the violent aspect of it more than now. That's not to say they're unconcerned with the social aspect, but between the two, they're much more concerned with the violence. The social aspect, they believe that social problems should be solved socially as opposed to with violence, right? So violent problems you can solve, you can respond with violence. Social problems you can respond socially.
Yeah. So, but how is violence not social?
Well, no, okay, so sorry, yeah, I fell into the Rothbard thing.
No, no, hey, stop, you're good. You're wildly intelligent.
We're just
asking questions. I'm not trying to gotcha. No. Yeah, you're good.
No, what I meant by social is that nonviolent interaction. That's what I meant. So they believe that things that are like nonviolent domination should be solved nonviolently, and violent domination you have a right to resist with violence.
Of course. I don't think I disagree with that. If violence is enacted on you, I don't know why you would have a non-right to react to that violence.
Yes, but I think the other way around doesn't. Like if there are assholes that exist in the world
That's a metaphysical claim.
That
there are assholes that exist in the world
that non-violently manipulate people to do their bidding.
Yes.
And I would say that violence against them would be justified. 100%.
What does violence mean?
No, like for like the Jonestown, for example, right? Like you have this fucker,
Kool-Aid.
Yes, that literally with no violence whatsoever convinced many people to kill themselves. I would say
he was making positive claims.
He was.
Yeah. Okay.
That if somebody came and shot him in the head violently, he would have justifiably reacted to a non-violent coercion with violence.
Yeah.
It's like, I think you can make a case that a violent act can stop a non-violent coercive activity. That too many people are we're passively accustomed to it, right? It goes back to that first. I remember that I thought this was a brilliant line in terms of sales. But it manifested what is evil about the contemporary world.
Yeah.
It was this line that it was a car that was able to park itself.
And Tesla?
I think it was before Tesla.
Mercedes?
Yeah.
Mazda?
And the tagline was that it is not more than what you need, but it's just more than what you're used to. Oof. Right? Wonderful, like a wonderful, brilliant sales tagline.
You came when you heard it.
Yes, but simultaneously so fucking evil, right? Because this is
you were amazed.
I was amazed.
You literally were speechless for the first time in your entire life.
Like I literally was
heard this
was like I was silent. It was like, and the tagline came on. I was like,
you're like,
whoa! I have no words to say besides it is profoundly amazing and profoundly evil, because this is what you convince people many times within sales is, why, like in my business, why pay $150 for a metal 16 by 24 print when you could pay $20 for a luster?
Yeah.
Not because it's more than what you need.
Well, it's just more beautiful.
It's just more than what you're used to.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Which just doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't. That's what I
means
mean.
nothing.
That's what I mean, though.
You could be used to eating dog feces
Yes.
all day, every day,
It's
and
more
someone
than-
offers you
Yes.
a sleeve of saltine
Yeah,
crackers.
yes. It simply says it's not more than what you need. It's just more than what you're used to. But again, that it goes back to that nature where I'm saying that, man, it's gross. It is this.
Because I don't.
Yeah.
Ace, I want you to say some stuff.
Okay, yeah. So I can kind of describe like what I think would be justified to happen to like these people who are like just assholes. Like they may not be violating rights in a strict sense, in the anarchist sense, but they're just all around.
Can I ask you a really dumb question that
Sure,
I feel like is
absolutely.
relevant in my wine inebriated state?
Absolutely.
How can one? So what was this? You said that assholes, but not violating rights.
Yeah.
How
so
are
they're,
you
like,
an
they're
asshole
just-
and not violating rights in anarchism?
Well, because you could just be like, if you were on your property and you said, I don't want this minority to come on my property, I would view that guy as an asshole because I think that's a bad thing.
But
to
he's
do.
not like
It's-
ontologically wrong in his action for excluding some minority. He's like, I don't like
Right. He's just a-
Guatemalans
he's a-
Yeah.
on my property.
He's just a
Or
dick.
Jews.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's just a dick, but
Right.
there's nothing like
Yeah.
ontologically wrong.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is. I was reading the Wikipedia article on Hop. Hoppa.
Hoppe.
Hoppa.
Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Hoppa is a name of a guy you guys all like. Okay.
Yes.
Hoppa. Hans Hermann Hoppa. Anyway,
Is he a
sorry.
Jew?
I don't
Okay.
want to get mailed a pipe bomb
Okay,
or
yeah,
anything,
yeah.
so I'm going to be respectful of Hop. I don't know, because maybe they're in the rights to send me a pipe bomb. But, but anyway, I was reading, and there was this, like, he is an advocate. You just poured wine all over the table. I refinished.
It's okay. You moved your fucking glass.
I know, it's fine. I refinished this table, Ace, in my garage.
Yes.
Anyway, but there was this emphasis on how like other libertarians and anarchists don't like him because he is really strong in his acceptance of states regulating immigration.
Yeah. Well, for that reason, and for so Hoppe believes in what would be known as like covenant communities. So a covenant community is essentially a private property organization where it's like all the property owners.
Covenant
essentially-
community?
A covenant community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
very
private property
Protestant
owners.
sounding.
The old covenant.
Okay.
The
Hey,
private
sorry, I'm
pro-
sorry, I'm being
Oh
an
no
ass.
no. So the private owners, or like you could imagine like a group of people come together and they lease their property out to people, but they contractually stipulate certain terms within their covenant.
And
on
within
people's
their
use of the
within
property.
their rights as an owner, they can stipulate anything they want.
Anything that's not aggressive. That's correct. Yeah. So like they couldn't say that if you like sing a song, I get to shoot you.
So, but what if you're black and I get to shoot you? What's the at what point could the ramification for violating this supposed contract be? Like where?
They would get excluded. Like if they violate the contract, they'll be excluded from the covenant.
That's aggressive.
No. That wouldn't be aggressive. Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
We're not gonna acknowledge that you exist. I'm wind up and having a great time. And I really apologize if I sound like I'm being an asshole in any capacity. Ace,
No.
I think you're one of the most intelligent people I know from Twitter. So I want to like give you that respect. But like also what do you mean excluded?
Like they can be excluded to mean they can be forced off the property.
Like we're all
if they
gonna
don't own the
dance,
property.
and then you're not gonna be allowed to dance with us.
Sorry, I get it. I understand now. Yeah.
No,
They would be excluded in the
yeah.
sense-
Sorry.
No. They would be excluded in the sense that they could be like forced off the property because they don't own the property.
But forced off in what means?
By
Where's
force.
the
here's
aggression?
I got you.
lie?
So I got you. I understand the question now better. Okay. So aggression is the initiation of violence. This is what it's the initiation of violence, but it's the initiation of violence into another person's bounds. But if someone's on my property, they are encroaching into my boundaries. So use of force to get them off of my property is defensive. It's defensive. It's not aggressive.
Okay, so the encroaching on my property being anywhere near me appeals to my Anglo sensibilities, and I get that.
Yeah.
I'm still confused where the line is. I think.
Are you asking for where force?
So I think
aggression,
no. So I've done 2 hours. That's pretty good. I think my problem. So Jeremy and I, in our discussions, and as a result of my discussions in my real life, all the time to a really annoying degree, I am so focused on the universal in my my description of how things are.
Or at least ought to be,
or whatever. Yeah, just the ideal, or however we want to say it. I don't know. To me, in my thinking and how I think of ideas, when you posit an idea, it must be most basically based on, or its foundation must be some idea of that which ought be. So when I say that, when I jokingly say that I'm a theocratic feudalist, I'm not necessarily, but it's based on my concept of the good and morality as a universal reflection of nature, and whether one operates within accordance with nature or not, or any of these different things. That's what ethics is to me. When I say that, if Jeremy kills somebody with a knife, I could go through every single action or thing that occurred in accordance with, or in relation to that action. I could tell you what's good and not. When I talk, when I listen, when I engage anarchist discourse, I don't hear that.
Okay.
And I'm just curious, to anarchist, because I am amazed at anarchist knowledge of history.
Yeah.
And because I don't have that. I don't know. I don't read as much as any anarchist I've ever met.
Well, at least for the last 500 years.
Yeah, whatever. I'm amazed at the education of anarchists. They're all they've all read everything by Hoppe. They've all read everything by Rothbard. I've never had that. I just don't read.
Yeah.
I'm amazed.
There's actually.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's actually a funny story about how FBI and CIA operatives were trying to infiltrate anarchist spaces, and they couldn't do it because they were too well read. They just couldn't. They were immediately outed because they didn't know anything.
No, it's just I'm just
But yeah,
I don't know any other group of people on Earth that are as well read as anarchists. And from that perspective, as far as if we're talking about Aquinas level ability to just quote people, anarchists win 100% all the time. In every interaction I've ever had, I don't know any of the names. I'm just I don't even know who that. But there's a metaphysical grounding I don't see, or I don't understand, or isn't articulated to me well enough. Because I've had friends tell me, "Oh, if you just read Anarchist, you'll be an anarchist." Because we agree on so much.
And I think a lot of it is because what they comprehend is the last 500 years.
Yeah.
And then they skip.
But that's everybody.
1,500
so I don't want the listener to think Jeremy's criticism is.
It isn't, but yet
specific to
they
anarchists
may
or
know
anything.
Aristotelian thought and maybe some of Platonic thought, but they skip a large portion of historical reality.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the intuitions of the anarchists is that they don't like the manufactured reality that we live in the last 500 years.
And I hate that too.
And I hate it too. Right?
We all hate it. Ace hates it. You hate it.
Yes,
I hate it. It's all disgusting.
That's something that we
never want to see Jen Psaki talk on Twitter ever again.
Yes,
Get it.
Yeah. We don't like these large corporations dictating the way we ought to behave.
I bet Ace sees Kamala Harris, and he's also just
just
God, let me pick a haircut for her.
Right. Yeah.
Like, just let me sit in the the hairdresser. Let me pick a haircut.
If you are
like,
hard,
it's just
the picture of her will make you flaccid. Right.
That's
what it is. Right?
Ace has been made flaccid by the sight.
You look at
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, like Pisaki.
So many times.
You look at Pisaki and you're like, I mean, she looks like the kind
you're like, which factory did you make her in?
Like she would lay there and she'd be like,
which is cool. And I want to tell the Ace specifically because, like, I think that Ace and I would disagree at a metaphysical level on a lot of things, but like, I'm on the same team. Like, if I had to pick people to form a government, quote unquote, I know you're an anarchist. I know that that's going to trigger you. If we were like, shit, we just killed everybody, we got to do something now, I'd pick Ace to be on my team.
Yes, but
like
the reason why I think anarchists
the metaphysical problem
are appealing to us is because
they're good people.
They're good people, but they're one step away from feudalism.
Okay.
They really are.
So
Ace talk.
So there actually is something to this. There actually is something to this, because the whole idea of an anarchist society is that how it's ordered in some sense is that you have private property owners, right?
That's what it is.
So private property owners are sovereigns on the like they have a sovereignty, and then their property is
like
they're sovereign on their
and
property.
Duchess and dukes.
And then like how and this is also goes back to the feudal system where it's like you can essentially create sort of like contracts where it's like, okay, instead of having the state where it's like we'll throw you in jail if you don't pay your taxes, it's like if you don't pay us, we're not going to protect you.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Which is very mob.
And that's how
literally the mob.
Well,
that's how the mob operated in Chicago in the 1920s.
Yes, but that's the way the feudal system existed.
Yes.
It's that there were smaller communities, there were smaller families. You had dukes, you had duchesses, you had, like this hierarchical structure, and then people existed within their land, and there were shoemakers, there were weapon makers, there were food makers, there were all these things, and it wasn't these large fucking countries, these big nations with these large federal powers that dictated laws to you.
And I think that your disgust and Ace's disgust are quite similar.
It's the same, right? Yes. Is that you had certain families, and so one family owned a castle, and they owned the feudal
what just
system.
happened? Right, so technical difficulty number 2. I was waiting for it to happen. I don't know what happens.
This is horrible. But anyway,
what were you saying?
So the only thing I was saying was that I do think things just need to be smaller.
Yeah.
Is what I liked about the feudal system is you had smaller families taking care of certain communities.
Which is what...
Yeah.
I don't know if you disagree with that, Ace, would you?
No, I 100% agree.
Yeah. And
so why are you a feudalist and you're an anarchist? Like, what's the...
I think a large part of it is because I think there needs to be that strong conflict. I don't think we need to eliminate the state.
Ace also says that.
You need the monarchy, you need the church, and you need the small community.
Okay, so you said a lot of stuff, and then Ace has had like 5 minutes to think about it.
Yeah.
So Ace, go off.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would certainly say that I wouldn't necessarily say we need it, but I would certainly say the conflict will always be there, right?
Yes.
So it's always going to be there. But the reason I'm an anarchist, I think the reason I'm an anarchist as opposed to feudalist, even though like anarchism in some sense like cosmetically or aesthetically appears like very feudal at times, is because so a lot of feudalism is based on essentially a violation of property rights. Like a lot of feudal lords essentially did not homestead the property themselves. So like the reason I would say I'm an anarchist is because the people who homestead unused land or abandoned land essentially are the owners of it, whereas someone who comes in later and says I'm your lord now, I would not view them as a legitimate owner of the land. But in general, I do agree that I would rather have things smaller in general, and I do think that anarchism as a system would mimic
I don't know if we have time before the computer shits out again. And I think Jeremy and I in the break said we both love to have you back on at some point.
I'd love to come back.
This is very worthwhile because I'm, especially for me personally, existing amongst all these anarchists and libertarians with whom I disagree pretty generally. This is actually a really helpful conversation because it's helping me understand kind of the perspective they come from, or like I know where their lines are better. And obviously all anarchists are different, which confuses me a little bit. But like, I don't know where the boundary is between what you're saying, Jeremy, and what you're saying, Ace. I don't know, because to me, Jeremy is appealing to a universal that at least you can say I understand.
Yeah.
Like Jeremy and I have spent a year and a half talking on record about the good. So like I know what you're talking about, but when I hear Ace, you talking about it, like I kind of intuitively understand and agree with you on a practical level, like about the nature of the way that the state currently influences people and stuff, but I'm not hearing the basis for it in a way that I can organize in my head. I think that's the thing for me, is I don't know how to organize.
Okay. So should I describe from the anarchist perspective like why the state is, like why we view all states as illegitimate?
Yes. Yeah. Because to me,
not only that, but what is the good? Ultimately, I think that because
that's my problem. I don't know what the good
because
is.
I think you very well articulated what you think the bad is.
Yeah.
But what is the good, and why is it?
And we agree on the bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I think all three of us agree on the bad. But why is the good the good?
Right. So I would certainly, this is where like, from the anarchist perspective, someone being within their rights, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing something good, right? So if I'm just respecting someone's rights, if I'm not aggressing against them, let's say, it doesn't mean I'm a good person or I'm doing something good necessarily. It just means I from an anarchist perspective, I'm not doing anything bad. So I'm like amoral. I'm in an amoral
but
state.
But I'm
not.
curious,
Well,
how are you doing
state,
something not bad if you're not doing something good?
I think
I would say
I don't know how you can do something neutral.
Let me defend it to one point.
Okay.
I think the anarchist is not simply, they're not making a positive claim. They're simply making a negative claim, saying that they're
okay.
Like a non-guilty.
I'm curious about the positive.
It's like you wouldn't say somebody is innocent of the crime. You were saying they're not guilty of the crime.
Okay, that's fine. Right. So Ace, what do you?
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think that you put that beautifully. Because that's like the anarchist is just saying they're not saying that this person being within their rights are going to do good things. It's just that from the perspective of an anarchist, it's like if you haven't violated someone's right, it doesn't mean you're not good or bad. It just means their rights have not been violated to the extent.
Yeah. And I think that my thing, so, and again, I say like Jeremy and I started in August 2020 doing this, and like I have by recording 70 of these things, I have developed a pretty coherent idea of the good, like what goodness means. Reading Aristotle and Aquinas and all these things, and like I don't know from what I've done, like that's literally what Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine, Avicenna, like they just focus on what nature is, what being is, and how to operate within its context.
But one can, from a categorical, syllogistical, or propositional state, make it what's understood as an E or
You got it. For the listener, explain what you're talking about.
So there's an E and O proposition, and so there's an A proposition, an I proposition, and so these two propositions make affirmative truth claims.
Yeah.
So all SRP or some SRP.
Yeah.
And so when you say that, you would say, you know, you could put S and P, the subject and predicate to be whatever. So you say all dogs are canines. You know, that is an affirmative claim of the nature of what the dog is.
Yeah.
But when you make an A proposition, you're not stating universally what it means to be a canine. You're just saying that all canines are in the category of.
Ace, how old are you?
I'm sorry, all dogs.
26.
26. Okay.
Yeah, we're in the same league here.
You and him, yeah.
I'm really impressed by like everything I mentioned. Ace is like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. and so
I've been
a big nerd for
yes. And then you have I propositions. So I propositions in a categorical sense have affirmative particular claims.
Yeah.
So the A propositions are affirmative universal claims. The I propositions are affirmative particular claim.
Yeah.
That simply means that at least one of these things are what they say it is.
Yeah.
So you say like some dogs are hairy, right? Or some cats are hairy.
Because there are cats that are not hairy.
Right. Yeah. And so you're making the claim that at least one
they
cat
are disgusting
is hairy.
and should all die
Yes.
from an aesthetic standpoint.
Fine. But at least one cat is hairy. That's all you're saying with the I proposition, some SRP.
Sorry, that's an argument of taste.
Yes,
I've been really, really active in my
But
disengagement from
but we
arguments
can't
of taste,
make the logical-
as Ace has seen in the group chat on Twitter.
we can't make the logical fallacies from an I proposition. You cannot inherently deny the other. So if you have some SRP, basically some cats are hairy, you cannot therefore logically infer that some cats are not hairy.
Yeah.
You can't because you're saying because it could be the case that all cats are hairy.
Yeah.
But some cats are hairy does not imply the other ones.
Yeah.
And so then you have the two other propositions, the E and the O proposition. So an E proposition is a universal negation of something, and so no SRP.
Yeah.
And so you have the quality of negation with the quantity of universal. So you would say that no cats are dogs.
Yeah.
That is a universal claim of the necessity nature of cats and dogs. And so you could for example convert them. So you could say no cats or dogs is the same as to say no dogs or cats.
Yeah.
Because universally you're denying the reality of both proposition and the subject.
Yeah.
Which is different from an affirmative subject and predicate where you cannot do that. If you say that all dogs are canines, you cannot convert them and say that all canines are dogs. Because in the affirmative universal claim, only the subject is being understood as being fully distributed. And so with a negation, you could say that. And so I think what many times someone like you and I find in common with anarchists are only in the negative claims. We're saying that,
which is literally what you said like 20 minutes in.
But it's with an E and the O propositions. If you say that no SRP, and so if an anarchist would say like there is no state that is not coercive.
Yeah. Of course.
I could agree with that. It's easily, right? Because that's a negative claim. And so you could invert those and say that no coercive reality is a non-state. Fine, yes.
Yeah.
And so in both cases, we could agree that the universal negation is that. It's the same thing with the particular claims. And so the negative particular claim, some S are not P, will be the same thing. So some... markets are or like some non-markets are not coercive. Again, we could begin to agree with these propositions because they're only via negativa, and so via negativa we could completely agree with. The moment that there's a disagreement is when we make either an A or an I proposition. Is when we make an affirmative universal or an affirmative particular claim. And so when if I were to claim that that is the case, that all transactions of any sort, whether it's a state transaction or a social transaction, is inherently in itself a coercive transaction, that's where the anarchists will be like a bit skeptical and be like, well, let's analyze what you mean by that. Because my universal claim is that there is no existence where there's an existence of a transaction that's inherently not coercive. There cannot be. Whether it's taxation, whether it's trade, whether it's a free market, whether it's social, whether it's government, whether it's elected or monarchical.
In a fallen world, that is just the case.
It's the nature. That's where the anarchists will begin to disagree. Because they're saying that there is a state where it is not coercive, where it could be based on trade.
Ace, what do you have to say?
No, I think he summed that up incredibly. Yeah, that's I would agree with the disagreement as well.
This is a really, I mean, the book is this big.
Yeah.
Ace, would you come on to cover City of God with us by Augustine sometime?
Maybe.
If you could audiobook it, like passively.
It's a thick ass book.
I understand. Yeah. I have a copy of it that's this thick.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
It would be cool to have a guest that is intellectually as honest as you to cover something like that with us. And that's a compliment. I'm feeling a little emotional that, like, I mean, again, we've had literally two bottles of wine in 2 hours. This is how it used to be. But, it's so, especially after the disastrous episode we've had, and, like, the fallout from that, to have somebody come on and just really be as interested in recognizing what's true as we are, relatively speaking, like, whatever. Our presuppositions are different. Like, I think that'd be interesting to explore, but, like, it would be cool to have somebody come on who's as intellectually interested at some point to do that. And it's come up many times. I think that when did Augustine live? Like 300 AD?
Yes,
The fact that this City of God could be an interesting,
or at least a bridge between the gaps.
Yes, it's just, I think that it's an interesting, I don't want to say reassessment, because it pre-existed anarchism for 1,500 years or whatever, but, like, it might. Sorry, Ace,
but it's a recognition of
Ace,
No, I was gonna do an actually thing, and I don't want to be that person.
No, I love actuallys. That's how I operate.
I think one of the technically the first anarchists we know of historically were the Taoists in 500 BC. Mm-hmm. Like,
sure,
organized,
and I associate anarchism with more of an Eastern. And again, I don't want to be insulting, and we can cover this again at a later time. We've hit,
but I don't think that's
we're at 2.5 hours, which is pretty good with a guest.
But I don't think that's wrong, because we remember Augustine was a Manichaean.
Yes.
Who adhered to Zoroastrian ideology.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I get that. And, like, I have not read much Hoppe. I cannot believe. Is that not a Jewish name? Is that Jewish?
Him.
Is it Jewish?
No, he's German. Well, I mean, that doesn't.
I just
he could be a German Jew.
Yeah, it doesn't mean he's not. But
anyway,
I don't think he's Jewish.
Half of Germans have to be Jewish or something. I have no knowledge of that. Hoppe, Hans Herpen, Hermann Hoppe. Anyway, I have a Jewish vibe from that. There's I don't know anything about German, but I don't know. People have told me I'd like him, but I have this inclination that I would disagree with his most basic fundamental claims as to. They say he's an Aristotelian. I don't know that until I dig into it.
I don't know if Hoppe would necessarily be an Aristotelian.
I have been told that many times by many people, so I don't know if that's a misunderstanding of Aristotle.
There might be particulars that you agree with. But maybe the generals you wouldn't.
Well, the fact that so many people I respect as people really like him.
Yeah.
I have to agree with him on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't know if, like, when he talks about the good, and the problem is when you and I talk about the good, I don't know if people know how to engage that.
Yes.
Which would be interesting. But
well, like, Ace understands teleology.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Where when most people talk about the natural law, they talk about the Newtonian sense of natural law. Yeah. Which is normally...
It's cool to talk to somebody who knows that that's a different thing.
Right. There's a difference. Because obviously Newton postulated that the natural law is that which appears within nature, right? Untouched by man. And so that's a different sense of purpose. Yeah. That I think Aristotle and Aquinas and
it's just and again, I'm a noob. I'm not a professor. I don't know. I've never taught classes. It's just very cool to, like, kind of off the cuff know somebody I generally disagree with and like talk to them and be like, they're like, okay, yeah. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, or at least understand the basics.
Thank God I don't have to explain it.
Yes, yeah. And I think
because I'm not capable right now of explaining it.
But I think with someone like Ace is that they're basing much of their like anarchy with Aristotelian and more of the Thomistic understanding of society and the way that they work.
So Ace, what do you have to say?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think
we're feeling a conclusion here.
Right. I'm kind of a follower. Like, out of all the anarchist philosophers, I'm probably closest to aligned with Roderick Long, and he's an Aristotelian through and through. Mm-hmm. He's wrote like about Aristotle exclusively, not even anarchism, and he's a really interesting person. He wrote a whole like essay. Are there any
works that you would recommend from that? Because we're looking for content to cover. So
sure. I think he has an essay. I think it's on the basis of natural law is the title. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I wrote it.
It's a beautiful title. At least.
And he goes through it and just talks about like criticisms, objections to it, and his own like argument to it. It's not a huge piece, but I think it's especially good for an anarchist.
What De Anima we covered for 3 hours, and that's only 50 pages. So
yeah. No, but understanding the natural law, I think it's just a very important.
Because I think that Jeremy and I, in doing the show, I think it would be interesting to cover stuff we haven't necessarily covered personally before. I don't know. What you said, Robert Long?
Roderick Long.
Roderick Long.
Yeah, that's something that I would love to cover because I have read so extensively Aristotle's work. Yeah. Just going through
as far as what's left.
Yeah. And even just teaching it at the university and everything. Yeah. I mean, there's so much that I read on him, and I read. It's just
so Ace. Would you call yourself an Aristotelian, or would you? I don't know if you find the same. I sense that you find the same issue that Jeremy and I feel, that like calling yourself a Blankian or
I usually don't like labeling. Like
me either.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
But I like Aristotle. I think he's right in a lot of things.
Okay.
I think that dismissal of Aristotelian and Thomistic ideology in the world after the 1500s was the greatest detriment to the Western world. After Luther, right?
Sorry, I'm going to make you so loud.
Yes, I think much of anything, whether you talk about morality, politics, ethics or aesthetics, anything,
etc.
The rejection of Thomistic and Aristotelian ideas.
Well, when you say Aristotelian and Thomistic, you're literally talking about a bridge of 2,000 years of philosophy.
Yes,
at least.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway,
that was developed heavily by like Mohammedans like Avicenna and Al-Farabi, that translated Aristotle and that just influenced much of the Western world. Okay. And so most of our ideas, even of rights, originally stems from an Aristotelian idea.
Yes.
But when most people speak of rights, they speak of a Newtonian right. So the Newtonian right is more Cartesian and is more Protestant and is not Aristotelian or Thomistic.
So what I'll do is we're going to pick... We've been working on scheduling out topics. Yeah. I'm going to shoot Ace a direct message on Twitter. I'm going to say, hey, a month from now, we're going to cover this.
Yeah.
And because you never sleep, you're going to be on our show.
Neither do I.
So talk about this.
I think that's what he and I share.
No, you guys are both deranged. Because you sleep 3 hours a night.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah, it really is.
I have to have 7.
Fuck no.
I need 4, and then I can.
There you go. I always say 4 to 6 is what ought to.
That's where you guys really 100% agree on. You're like,
even if
I gotta get up at 8, it's 4, it's fine.
Even if I don't put an alarm,
hang myself.
I don't put an alarm on my phone or whatever, and I just wake up and I look at the time and I'm like, it's 4 hours later.
When I recognize if it's 3 a.m. and I'm like, I have to get up at 6. I will tie a noose. I'm like, I would rather die than accept that I'm only going to sleep 3 hours a day. And then you guys are like, ready for this?
Yes.
No.
Most of the time, my drive home is about an hour drive. The entire time I drive home, there is no music playing. It is me discussing.
You're like a
things.
RoboCop.
No, I just talk to myself.
Oh yeah, I do the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
You guys are freaking.
Yeah,
This is what I said.
I
You guys,
raise objections.
you guys,
and
you were like, you're literally writing platonic dialogues between your thoughts on the way home in the car.
if I'm ever stopped at
When
a
I-
stoplight,
when I said
people
earlier
look at me because
today-
I'm like, I'm passionate.
So,
I'm like, I talk
this
to
is
I
a
hit myself in the
beautiful-
head and I start talking. Yeah.
Okay, so Ace, do you have anything else to say? Because I'm going to close this out on a beautiful analogy.
I think one thing if to circle back just a little bit to anarchism, one thing I forgot to say is that so while I definitely see like the strongest argument against anarchism is like look around, there doesn't appear to be a lot of like anarchist societies.
Well, really quickly, my argument would be look around at how much people are stupid.
Oh, okay.
Couldn't govern.
people are
They have
just
no
assholes.
idea how to
Yeah,
operate.
we're
But
dicks.
still.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
I would
so-
say that if people can't govern themselves, you definitely don't want them governing you. So
Yes.
Yes.
I think just to circle back a little bit. So there have been anarchist societies in the past. Ancient Ireland is an example that lasted 2,000 years. So that we do have. I'm sorry. I know why you're laughing. Yeah, I always bring this up.
No, I devil horned it. I devil horned it.
Yeah. So there are societies that lasted that long. And I do think there's something there to where we can at least show like a proof of work where it's like, okay, this does work in certain conditions. I would also say that I don't think that it is destined to fail in the sense that if we thought, so I don't take, I have a negative view of human nature, but I don't think it's like eternal, like in the sense that if we always made the same mistakes, if we always made, well, it's eternal in the sense that I'm not saying it doesn't change, but there are social factors that influence it to where those are malleable. That's what I should say. To where like slavery, for example, right? We never would have abolished slavery if unless we could make some type of progress where people who used to be slaves are now viewed as human beings with rights. And I think that's an idea where we can say that. Oh, good.
In conclusion, Jeremy's question would be, and maybe we can discuss this next time, is that why abolish slavery?
Yeah, that would be.
Which is that's one of your most controversial issues. Where people
because I think all we did was semantically change the definition of what it means to be a slave,
which we can discuss now, whatever. Like we
call them employees.
We're at 2.5 hours. I am hammered.
Okay, yes.
And I gotta walk around the block several times before I can drive home.
Yeah,
but this is interesting because I think that this has given me insight into, because I don't want to say it, but like of all the people I follow on Twitter who are anarchists or libertarians or whatever, Ace is the one I intellectually respect the most.
Yeah.
Because I watch when your quote tweets are fun, but practically irritating if I'm trying to just have a passive time on Twitter or whatever, which is fine. But you're constantly asking questions of people, which to me, when like Jeremy, if you were to teaching a class of 18-year-olds about logic, your teaching wouldn't be telling them what to do, but be like, what is the, like, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? It's a questioning thing to the point.
Yes.
And the fact that Ace understands that makes me comfortable talking about this stuff with him.
Right,
in a way that I don't feel with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Online at least, especially after our experience and whatever.
Not with Thaddeus
or whatever. Like it's just there's a certain sense of intellectual honesty when you watch people, whether or not you disagree or agree with whatever the prescription is. If you're watching them ask the right questions all the time, there's a certain trust you can have in discussion, and that's actually why I asked you on, Ace. Is I was just
thank you.
Jeremy's an asshole to people who are stupid, and I like that because I'm also an asshole to people
Yeah.
who are stupid, but like,
Or at least perceived asshole. It's
or whatever.
Because
I know, but I'm
yes, but
saying people would call you an asshole.
Yes.
Let me call you an asshole.
even though I don't insult them.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
You make people mad who are unintelligent. That's fine.
Okay, fine. Yes.
And I have to, when I have guests on,
Yeah.
it's not that you're not going to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
We can't just have fun people on.
Yeah.
We have to find people who are like intellectually honest enough to have a conversation.
Yes.
And I feel like that's just what happened.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was very cool. Is that I remember I was talking to like Derek Ace, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like I know you better after this conversation than I did before. That's very cool to me. It's just like, okay, so he is. I feel like I have a little bit of a like Amanda. I can see her hand.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of the weird understanding of a woman's intuition of people.
Yeah.
That I remember watching Ace, like whether I'm on Slurp Gang or whatever, and I'm watching Ace interact with people, or like whether or not he's quote tweeting people, I'm like, okay, this guy's a little more intellectually honest
Yes. Yeah.
than a lot of other people I see online. He's more intellectually interested in truth per se.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just feel I'm like smiling because I feel vindicated in that. Like, oh, it didn't turn into Jeremy being an asshole to somebody for 20 minutes because he's not actually what I thought he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is this our first guest besides my mom that we've had on since the debacle?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so Ace,
Yeah.
thank you for resurrecting my trust
Actually,
and having
I think
guests
Snoopy
on.
was
Thank you guys for inviting me here. This was great. I had a great time.
So we'll have Ace on again.
Yeah.
To the
Yeah.
listener. We're not done.
Yes.
But I also don't think a 6-hour episode, especially when it's what? Is it almost 4 a.m. to you, Ace?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you mind?
Close.
Can I ask where you live, or?
Maine.
I live in Maine.
We have the
Oh.
best tap water. It's a union between the two
Yes,
states
yeah,
that have the
yeah.
best tap water.
Nice. Yeah.
Literally as far away as you could be besides
Yeah.
Florida.
I honestly think a lot of times we just need to have guests who are from the East Coast.
Okay.
Because in general,
We both like East Coast.
Yes,
better.
because when I lived out east, it was like people are just used to people being blunt,
Yeah.
and that's what I noticed. People on the West are more concerned about the appearance of things than they are about the thing itself.
Yeah.
While people on the East tend to be more blunt and concerned about the thing itself.
So
than the
they're less
appearance.
Protestant than.
They are,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yeah. And so, like
So-
I lived down in Pennsylvania for what's it, like 5 years,
Yeah.
and for the most part, it's like it was easier for me to talk to someone from Philly, from Scranton, from whatever, because they were dicks as well. They were just it isn't that they're dicks, but they're just wanting to express that which is
Well,
true.
they're a dick in the way that other people would call
Yes,
you a dick. Okay.
but out in the West,
So
it's
I'm going to
like,
let
no.
Ace share any thoughts he has.
Yes, for the end.
We're both monologuers, so I really apologize.
I appreciate both you guys so much for giving me this opportunity to come on, and
Yeah.
you guys asked great questions.
Can I
and
tell you what Jay said?
Sure.
He's probably going to be like, you didn't characterize what I said correctly.
Is he a Jew? Or is it...
No, he's Argentinian and Jewish. So he's both a Nazi and a not Nazi.
Yes, yeah.
But it's very obvious, especially when I've recorded with Slurp Gang.
Yeah.
It's a spectacular show. I have a great time, but Ace always has this little bit of a desire to discuss, like what is Klopfic? Or like, like what, but what is it? What is it? Is it good? Or and that it's cool to interact with people in an intellectual dimension.
Yeah.
That you don't get to normally.
Yeah.
And that's why I was really excited. I was like, I want to have Ace on because Ace really cares about what is in a way that a lot of people don't and couldn't. So anyway, I don't remember how I started that statement, but I seriously, six laps around the block.
Yeah.
Before I blow whatever is under the limit.
Is Leroy's open?
Maybe.
maybe.
Anyway, sorry, Ace. I want you to.
Oh,
we're
no.
bullshitting.
I was just gonna say, no. I thank you guys so much. You guys asked some absolutely great questions. I probably didn't explain it as well as I probably should have. Like there were a couple times where I was like, I should have explained that better. But ultimately, I think I did. I think I could have answered them better. But your questions were like right on.
Well, I also think so. I think that most people, especially here, are inclined to not give themselves the credit they're due.
There's a false sense of modesty.
Well, I don't. False sounds insulting, but like Ace, you're intelligent. You're more intelligent than most people I know.
Thank you.
So that's fine. That's just say okay. That's fine.
Yes,
Still, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Is like okay, you can keep
that.
up. You can keep up. So that was fun. That. But anyway, I don't know if we need to go eat pancakes or something.
I know.
Anyway, well, I'm going to send you a direct message at some point when we decide on a topic we think could be. City of God would require like 7 episodes to cover.
Right, yeah.
So I don't necessarily want to stick that on you, but if I ever think that there's something you might gain something out of, I'll shoot you a message and be like, what does an anarchist say I have to say about this?
Yeah.
But anyway, I think, are we good?
Yeah.
Ace, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you guys so much for giving me this opportunity to come on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
It was very fun.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for making my week, Ace. That was good.
Oh.
That was good. All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Later, guys.
Bye.